I discovered my family only valued my money, not me. I cut them off, reclaimed my life, and found freedom in choosing myself over their manipulation. My name is Emma, and until a few nights ago, I believed that my family loved me. It began with a simple notification. My aunt had given me a video. I was in the midst of preparing dinner when my phone rang. I wiped my hands on a towel, grabbed my phone, and unintentionally tapped the message. At first, I assumed she sent me something random, a family movie, or an old film she found amusing. But then I heard my mom's voice. Emma should be grateful. She'd be nothing without us. My stomach sank. The video looked unsteady, as if someone had laid their phone down without realizing it was recording, but the voices were perfectly audible. A pathetic failure? That's what Emma is, my father said with a laugh. But at least she's good for something, paying our bills. Laughter? I held my phone more tightly. If Emma ever stopped sending money, my aunt, who had just sent this, said with a smirk, we'd just guilt her into it. She's too soft to say no. My entire body became numb. Emma. This is my name. They weren't discussing a hypothetical person. They were not fooling around. They were talking about me. I had been assisting them for years, paying their rent, covering their debts, and spending my own funds to ensure they never struggled in the same manner I did. And is this what they truly thought of me? I was still stuck, my thumb hanging over the screen, when the video abruptly disappeared. This message has been unsent. I gazed at the notification. My aunt realized her error. She must have panicked and deleted the video, assuming I hadn't noticed. I should have challenged her. Should have called her out. I should have told them I knew everything. But instead, I put down my phone and pretended I hadn't seen it. And that's when I determined I wouldn't react. Not yet. I had a plan. I sat for what seemed like hours, staring at my phone. The words echoed in my thoughts. Emma should be grateful. A pathetic failure. She's too soft to say no. I wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding. Perhaps they were joking. Perhaps I was missing some context. But deep inside I knew better. I knew the truth. They intended every word. And the worst part? They were not wrong about one thing, I was too soft to say no. How many times had they guilted me into assisting them? How many times have I put my own life on hold to ensure they got what they required? My father's temporary financial difficulties developed into me paying rent for years. My brother's tuition, he didn't even complete college. My mother's incessant emergencies, always neatly timed when I had just been paid. And I had done everything without hesitation. Because that's what families are meant to do, right? I had spent years convincing myself that I was doing the correct thing. They appreciated me. They said they loved me. But that one video shattered every fantasy I had left. And now they believed they had gotten away with it. My aunt had unsent the message, perhaps breathing a sigh of relief that I hadn't noticed it. Perhaps she even reassured everyone. Don't worry, Emma didn't watch it. They assumed I was still in the dark. That was my advantage. I could have texted her right there. Could have confronted her. I told her I had seen everything. But what would that accomplish? They'd simply deny it. Make excuses. Twist the circumstances so that I feel guilty. I'd let them assume I was still their dutiful little financial account, for the time being. The next payment was due in a few days. And this time, things would be different. The next morning, I awoke to my normal routine, but everything felt different. The sun still shone through my drapes. My coffee brewed just as it usually did. But there was this awareness in the back of my mind, as if I was observing my life from a new perspective. My phone vibrated. A message from my mother. Mom. Morning, sweetie, just checking in. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the message. It was usual, too normal. She never texted me simply to check in. There was always a cause, and a request was hidden somewhere. And just a few minutes later. Mom. Oh, by the way, the rent is due soon. Can you send it by Friday? There it was. The same cycle. The same motif. But this time, I was not going to play along. I typed a response with my fingertips hovering over the keyboard. My typical response would be something like of course, or no issue. Maybe I'd even apologize for taking so long, just so they didn't feel inconvenienced. Not this time. I deleted everything and simply responded, I can't this month. Before sending the message, I glanced at it for a few seconds. I set down my phone and waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Buzz. Mom. What do you mean, you can't? I could see the displeasure on the television. I'd never said no before. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took a sip of my coffee, leaving her to stew in her bewilderment. A couple more messages arrived. Mom. Emma, this is serious? We are counting on you. You know we don't have any other options right now. Another buzz. This time it's from my aunt. Aunt. Hello, honey. Your mother is freaking out. Is everything okay? I nearly laughed. Is everything okay? Sure. Everything was excellent. I had spent years paying for their life, and when I hinted at stopping, they panicked. They never asked me if I was all right, if I needed assistance. It never was about me. It had never been. I took a deep breath and responded. Me. I've had some unexpected bills this month. I cannot send anything. Sorry. That was it. There's no explanation, no apologies. And then I waited. What happened next revealed all I needed to know. The silence was terrible. For the first time in years, I had declined. They didn't know how to manage it. I stared at my phone, watching the 3 small dots appear and disappear. Over and over. My mom was typing. Stopping. Typing again. I envisioned her sitting there, fuming, trying to figure out the best way to persuade me to change my decision. Finally, her response got through. Mom. Emma, what do you mean by unexpected expenses? Is there anything more essential than your family? There it was. Guilt trip. They had always employed the same technique. I didn't respond. I simply let the message sit there. Less than 1 minute later. Mom. You know your brother doesn't have a way to pay his rent. If he's kicked out, that's on you. Ah. The brother card. Classic. Then another message. Mom. Emma, we raised you. We cared for you when you had nothing. Is this how you're repaying us? I gritted my jaw and tightened my fingers around my phone. When I had nothing? They never cared for me. I put myself through school. I worked 3 jobs to get out of that house. And as soon as I got money, they hung on to me like leeches, sucking me dry. They grabbed everything, so I had nothing. My phone vibrated again. Aunt. Emma, dear, do not do this. We are family. Your mother is merely upset. You know how she gets. Simply send the rent, and everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. Who is it fine for? I put down my phone, my heart hammering. I needed a second to breathe and ponder. I strolled to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and took a slow sip while looking at the clock on the wall. I could feel something shifting within me. For years, I had been afraid of this moment. I was afraid that if I stopped paying, they would detest me. They would cut me off. They would turn their back on me. But now I know the truth. They've never loved me. They adored what I could offer them. And the moment that ceased, they would reveal who they were. Buzz. I strolled back to my phone and picked it up with firm hands. This time, the communication came from my father. Dad. Emma, I'm not sure what has gotten into you, but this is unacceptable. You are being selfish. This family needs you, and you're behaving like an entitled brat. Grow up and do the right thing. There it was. The final mask slips. No more faking kindness. No more pretending to care, just demands. I stared at the words, my heart racing in my ears. Then another notification came up. A voice message. From my aunt. My hands trembled as I paused, my thumb lingering above the play button. Something told me this would change everything. I hesitated for a long time, staring at the small play button on the screen. A voice message. From Aunt D. My heart beat against my ribcage. She was not the type to send voice messages. If she had something to say, she usually sugarcoated it in text, passive-aggressive with just enough phony sweetness to make me feel bad. But this was different. Slowly, I pressed play. Her voice came through, harsh and impatient. Aunt. Listen, Emma. I'm not sure what game you're playing, but this isn't humorous. Your mother is losing her sanity. Your father is upset. And honestly, I do not blame them. You have always been a little ungrateful. But this is quite selfish. I felt my gut clench, but I forced myself to continue listening. Aunt. You have a wonderful job, right? You earn more than any of us. You don't even need the money. Meanwhile, your family is struggling. So what? Did you just wake up one day and realize you don't care? A bitter laugh. You owe them, Emma. After all they've done for you. Following all the sacrifices they made. They gave you life. Now you're going to walk away? Pretend they do not exist. What kind of a daughter would do that? She breathed forcefully, and for a moment I believed she was finished. But then, Aunt. You know what? Her tone altered, becoming colder now. If you truly want to be that kind of person, that's fine. But do not expect them to forgive you. Don't expect to come crawling back once you discover how much you rely on them. Because when you pass this line, there's no going back. The message terminated. Silence. I let the words sink, my thumb hovering over the replay button. My ears rang, and my hands were numb. I should have been afraid. I should have panicked. I should have been hurrying to make things right, to correct this, to apologize. But instead, I felt relaxed. More than that, I felt free. Because she'd just verified everything. They did not love me. They did not respect me. They did not even recognize me as a person. They regarded me as nothing more than a financial account. A moving, breathing ATM. And the instant I stopped distributing money, I was nothing. And if that was the case, perhaps it was time to become nothing to them. Buzz. Another communication from my mom. Mom. This is your last opportunity, Emma. Send the rent. I stared at the message for a very long time. Then, without hesitation, I blocked her. I blocked my father, I blocked my aunt. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I was free. Or so I thought. Because the next day, my brother arrived at my home. The knock at my door sent shivers down my spine. It was early. It's too early. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon at this early hour, when most people were still sleeping. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Perhaps it was a neighbor. Perhaps there was a parcel. Maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. Then, another knock. This time, it was louder. Become more insistent. I took a slow breath, braced myself and walked to the door. My fingers paused on the handle, and my heart pounded in my chest. And then I opened it. There he was. My brother. His face contorted between fury and desperation, and his clothes wrinkled as if he hadn't slept. God's eyes. Bloodshot. Wild. Are you serious, Emma? His voice was as cutting as a sword shoved against my skin. What the hell is wrong with you? I blinked and kept my expression neutral. Good morning to you too. He scoffed and ran his hand through his already untidy hair. Don't do that. Don't act like this isn't a big deal. You blocked everyone. Mom is freaking out. Dad's losing his mind. You're just... What? Cutting us off? Pretending we don't exist? I crossed my arms and leaned against the door frame. I don't know, Jason. Maybe I just got tired of being treated like a piggy bank. His jaw clenched. Oh my God. Not this again, not this again. I gave out a sour laugh. Jason, I've been paying your rent for years. I've covered your bills, your food, even your stupid gym membership. And the one time I say no? The one time I set a boundary? Mom calls me a selfish brat. Dad says I'm unacceptable and you show up at my door like I committed a crime. His lips parted as if he were going to argue, but no words emerged. So I continued going. And don't even try to pretend you care about me. I cocked my head, my voice cold. I saw the video. His face turned pallid. For the first time, genuine dread flashed across his eyes. What video? I smiled, but it was not a pleasant one. You know exactly what video. Jason shifted on his feet, looked aside as his hands balled into fists. Look, it wasn't serious, okay? We were just joking. You're being dramatic. Joking? My voice was soft, yet as sharp as glass. You all sat around laughing, calling me a pathetic failure. Saying I should be grateful for the chance to pay your bills. Do you know what that feels like, Jason? To hear your own family talk about you like that? He breathed sharply and rubbed his face. Emma, come on. No. I cut him off. You come on. You want money? Get a job. You want someone to take care of you? Find someone else. Because I'm done. Silence. He just stood there and stared at me. And for a little moment, I saw something spark across his face. Something rough. However, it was gone just as suddenly. You don't mean that, he grumbled. I retained his stare. Yes, I do. Another lapse in stillness. Then his expression darkened. His mouth curled into something unpleasant. Fine, he snapped. You want to be a selfish bitch? Go ahead. But don't come crawling back when you realize you have no one left. With that, he turned to walk away. I stood there, watching him leave. My chest was tense, yet my back was straight, because he was incorrect. I did have someone leave. I had myself. But, as I closed the door, letting out a trembling breath, my phone vibrated. I looked at the screen, and the familiar name flashed. It was my mom. But I was not going to pick up. Not this time. I had been at her mercy for so long. Her demands, her guilt trips, the way she used my own sense of duty against me, manipulating me into giving up all I had in order to keep her from breaking apart. Not anymore. I went away with the phone facing down. The truth was, I was done. I'm done with being a continual source of money. I'm tired of being the safety net that kept my family afloat when they couldn't be bothered to forge their own path in life. I'm done with lies and manipulation. They never asked me how I was doing. Never considered the toll it had on me to continually take up the slack. I had been carrying their weight for years, my mother's, my father's, and my brother's. All of them acting as if I owed them something, as if my life was just one long, endless repayment for everything they had done for me. But nobody had ever asked what I needed. Nobody had ever cared for me. And now, I was taking control. But my decision was not unnoticed. The following morning, when I sat in my living room, the silence felt oppressive. The weight of my decision was beginning to sink in. But there were no regrets. No second guessing. I had made the correct decision. Then, my doorbell rang. I was not surprised. It was Jason. I could tell by the way he knocked, demanding and impatient. This was the last person I expected to show up. But it's not surprising at all. I slowly opened the door, keeping my expression neutral. "Emma," he began, his usual arrogant tone gone, replaced by something almost pleading. "You need to listen to me." I did not welcome him in. I stood at the doorway, arms crossed. "I don't need to listen to anything you have to say, Jason." He blinked, taken aback. "No, you don't understand." His tone softened, almost desperate. "Mom's freaking out. Dad's calling me, asking what's going on. They don't know how to fix this? You've cut us all off. You can't just leave us hanging like this." I scoffed and leaned against the doorframe. "Oh, I'm sorry, did you think I was just going to keep enabling you? Keep paying your rent, your bills, and pretending everything was fine? No, Jason, I'm done. I don't care how much you or mom or dad beg. I'm done playing the role of the family ATM." His eyes flared with rage. "You're acting like we've never done anything for you. Like we're all just users, right?" I did not flinch. "Oh, believe me, I know exactly what I've been to you all. I've been a cash machine. A free ride. And I'm tired of it." Jason's face twisted. "You can't just leave us hanging like this. You owe us, Emma." The words stung. But they did not shatter me. They only made me more determined. "I owe you?" I said, my voice firm. "I've given you everything. I paid for your rent, your groceries, your bills, while you just sat there and watched me do it. And you want to talk about owing?" His fist clenched at his side. "You'll regret this. You'll regret cutting us off." I couldn't help laughing. "No, Jason. You'll regret it. Because I'm not the one who needs you anymore." Without waiting for his reaction, I slammed the door in his face. It felt nice. But I sensed that the drama was far from ended. Later that night, my phone vibrated again. I almost did not want to check it, but curiosity gnawed at me. It was from my father. "Dad. Emma, we raised you. Do not assume you can simply walk away from everything we've done for you. You're making an enormous mistake. Come back, we'll chat about it. We will fix this." I could almost sense desperation in his words. I sat there for a time, phone still in hand. I could have ignored it. I may also have blocked him. But I had a better idea. I wasn't simply going to block them. I was going to make them pay for every single lie, every single time they took me for granted. And it was going to start now. I stood up, approached my desk, and opened my laptop. It was time to deliver a message they would never forget. So I started typing. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wasn't going to sit back and let them reintegrate into my life as if nothing had happened. I was done being the punching bag. This time, I was in control. I thought about everything I had done for them. All of the payments I'd made, the bailouts. I swallowed my pride and helped them, even though I knew I was the one being drained. No more. Now was their turn to feel the consequences of their conduct. I opened my email and began typing. First, I gathered all of the financial records. Every payment I'd ever made on their invoices. Each bank transfer. Every check I'd sent over the years to compensate for their faults. It was time to remind them of the things they had taken from me. I added a remark to the top of the email. Here's a detailed summary of everything I've done for you over the years. I'm done being your lifeline. I'll no longer be your ATM, and I'll no longer let you make me feel guilty for choosing myself. Consider this my final invoice. You don't owe me anything anymore, but you will owe yourself the realization of how much I've sacrificed, all because I thought family was supposed to help each other, not drain each other. Then I added the receipts, bills, and payments I'd sent. But it was not the end. Definitely not. I signed on to the family group chat, which used to keep me on edge with their complaints and demands. I browsed through the messages, reading the ones where they said they needed me and guilted me into assisting them. Then I tried something I hadn't done in years. I responded. You all talk a lot about what you've done for me, but you've forgotten how much I've given up for you. And here's the reality check. You never needed me. You just used me. I'm done. This is my last message. Don't ever contact me again. I sent it. The silence that followed was nearly lovely. I slumped back in my chair, feeling the weight of the decision wash over me. For once, there were no more phone calls. No more guilt trips. No more pretending they had any authority over me. They might continue their manipulations, lies, and empty promises. I was free. But just when I thought it was finished, I got one last message. From Jason. You're making a mistake, Emma. You'll regret this. Family sticks together. I smiled to myself. I knew he was only attempting to get under my skin, but this time, it didn't work. Because I didn't need them. I had a life. My freedom. And it was enough. It wasn't the dramatic explosion I had envisioned. It wasn't a great clash. But in its own way, this was much better. I had assumed command without anyone seeing it coming. And the best part? They lost their control over me. As I turned off my phone for the night, a sensation of calm washed over me. I did not have to play their game. I didn't have to continue sacrificing myself for those who didn't value me. It wasn't the revenge I expected. It was quieter. Be more deliberate. And far more satisfying. Now I could finally breathe. And the best part, I could finally live for myself, and that, in the end, was the sweetest victory. Reflection. Wow, what a ride that was, right? It's incredible to think of how much Emma had to endure for so long. But in the end, she gained control of her life. I admire how she refused to let her family's conflict and guilt bring her down. Instead of a massive conflict, she simply cut them off quietly, but with force. Making a scene is not always the best way to exact revenge. It's about reclaiming your life and showing that you're no longer a doormat. But here's the thing, not everyone would have handled it that way. Some could argue that she should have pushed for the relationship. Maybe even give them a second opportunity. Others may believe she made the correct decision by removing them entirely. So what are your thoughts? Do you agree with Emma's decision? Was her silent vengeance satisfying, or overly harsh? Please share your ideas in the comments below. I would love to know what you think. My husband and mother-in-law treated me like a servant, mocking my efforts, demanding obedience, and making me feel invisible. Alex's words cut through the clatter of dishes like a keen scalpel. Alara, bring me some tea now. I halted, my hands dipped in soapy water. Hold on, I'm doing the dishes. What? His tone was incredulous and impatient. Stop that and then bring me the tea right away. Can't you obey simple commands? But, I began, only to be interrupted. What a useless wife you are. Make me some sweet coffee, said another voice. Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, spoke from the living room. She sat there munching a slice of cake she had grabbed from the fridge, her eyes gleaming with malice. I sighed and looked at the stack of dishes. There are so many. Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife, Alex's voice hissed, each syllable hurting. I was Alara, a 28-year-old working mother whose life felt more like a jail than a home. Married at 23, I had hoped for love and friendship, but instead found myself in the hands of Alex and his domineering mother. Our 4-year-old son was the only bright spot in an otherwise dark existence. We lived in Alex's parents' house, a decision foisted on me under the premise of caring for Mrs. Whitmore after my father-in-law died. Initially, I sympathized with her alleged anguish, but it quickly became evident that I was nothing more than a part in her cruel game of home oppression. Cooking, cleaning, and working just weren't enough. My attempts were treated with derision, and my meals were either left untouched or sharply ridiculed. The stir-fry is so half-hearted, Mrs. Whitmore would remark. Cook it properly from scratch. I'm busy and can only do simple things, I'd say, trying to maintain a calm voice. That's why I hate backtalk from my daughter-in-law, she quipped. Cook from scratch? Why don't you cook? You are a good cook, correct? I risked to react once and soon regretted it. Why would I do housekeeping with you here? She responded coldly and dismissively. Are you out of your mind? Their brutality grew with time, progressing from harsh words to a chilling quiet. They began to entirely disregard me, as if I were a ghost in my own home. My presence, which was previously underestimated, now appeared completely invisible. 5 years passed in this suffocating environment. Alex and I turned 35 and 33 respectively. Our son developed, but the unpleasant atmosphere in the house remained constant. My mother-in-law, now 63, appeared to thrive on my suffering. One evening, as I trudged home from work, a heavy revelation hit me. They saw my existence as meaningless. I was a shadow, unnoticed and unheard. The only voice that acknowledged me was my son's. The idea of losing even that minor recognition was agonizing. When I returned home, I started cooking right away, hoping to lift my spirits. I made mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a stir-fry with bell peppers and pork, attempting to bring some regularity to our dinner. Bring me the mayo, Alex said unexpectedly, breaking his long silence. Sure, here you are, I said, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not thanks or discussion, but rather a command. It was the last straw, the limit of my patience and tolerance. Mrs. Whitmore demanded, clean the toilet. What? Now? I was shocked. Yes, now, she demanded, her voice full of hate. I snapped back, unable to suppress my annoyance. Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty, just like your heart, she said. Our dispute immediately escalated, with Alex interjecting and demanding that I apologize to his mother. But I refused, standing firm for the first time in years. The conflict reached its climax, and a conclusion formed within me. I needed to get out of this toxic environment, not just for myself, but also for my baby. I returned to my room, my determination stiffening. I downloaded divorce papers, completed them, and slapped them in front of Alex. His amazement was evident, but I felt just icy determination. I'm filing these, I announced, my voice firm. As I stood there, looking at my husband's puzzled expression, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to regain my life. The days after I declared my divorce were a blur of frigid stares and stinging remarks, but in the midst of the chaos, I discovered an unexpected sense of freedom. Mrs. Whitmore looked at the food I was serving one evening with distaste. You call this food? Even a child cooks better. I bit my tongue, concentrating on my son's happy expression. Eat up, sweetheart. I made your favorite tonight. Alex added in, his voice full of sarcasm. Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke. I could feel my rage rising, but I held my cool. I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son. Mrs. Whitmore snorted. Don't act high and mighty. You're just a burden in this house. The tension around the table was apparent. Alex's attempts to insult me grew more intense. So, Alara, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life. I stared him directly in the eyes. I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son. His smirk faded somewhat, and a spark of concern appeared on his face. Mrs. Whitmore was quick to intercede. Don't be absurd. You need us more than we need you. The talk drifted to finances, which they typically avoided. You do realize that without my salary, this household would crumble, I said to myself rather than to them. Mrs. Whitmore sneered. We'd manage. We don't need your pity money. But Alex's silence spoke volumes. He understood the truth. They would be in serious financial trouble if I did not provide a living. Their behavior deteriorated during the next few days. Mrs. Whitmore alternated between trying to sweet-talk me into staying and shouting insults when I refused. Alex, on the other hand, appeared confused, his arrogance eroding as the reality of his financial dependency became clear. One afternoon, I overheard a talk between them that chilled me to the core. She can't just leave us like this, Alex growled. We need her money. Mrs. Whitmore's response was chilly and calculating. Do not worry. I have a plan. We'll make her life so unpleasant that she won't want to leave. Hearing their genuine objectives exposed was a revelation. They did not care about me or our son. It was all about power and wealth. That night, as I lay in bed, an idea began to emerge in my head. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But it would not be fought with words or trivial disputes. I'd strike them where it hurts the most, their pride and their pocketbook. The following morning, I began putting my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, a bright, no-nonsense woman who was highly recommended. I want a divorce, and I want to make sure they don't get a penny more than they deserve, I informed the woman. She nodded, her eyes bright with determination. We'll make sure of it. You've been the only breadwinner, correct? We'll make use of that. My resolve got stronger with each passing day. I began documenting everything: insults, financial manipulation, and even little grievances. It was time to turn the tables. It was time to accept the repercussions of their deeds. As I prepared my case, I felt a sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I felt like I had power over my own fate. The shades of scorn were slowly lifting, revealing a new dawn. As the divorce proceedings began, the mood in the house became more caustic. Yet, with each passing day, my panic faded, replaced by a steely resolve. Mrs. Whitmore decided to try a new strategy one evening. "Alara, dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family." Her comments were insincere. I met her stare unwaveringly. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me." Alex, who had been silently watching, scoffed. "Oh, playing the victim now? You're not as innocent as you pretend to be." I felt a wave of rage, but I kept my voice composed. "I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat." As is typically the case, the subject turned to finances. "You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him?" Alex was skeptical. I grinned with a tiny, confident curl of my lips. "I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage." Mrs. Whitmore turned her gaze into a sneer. "You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back." But their remarks no longer had force over me. I recognized my worth and knew the truth. The following day, I met with my lawyer again. She outlined the strategy clearly. "We'll expose their financial dependency on you. It will play a crucial role in the custody battle and the division of assets." I nodded, feeling vindicated. The law was on my side, and I was prepared to fight back. At home, the tension had reached a boiling point. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to discredit me got increasingly desperate. "You think you're so smart," she sneered one evening. "But you're just a cold-hearted woman abandoning your family." I stared her directly in the eyes. I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself." Alex leaped in, his voice full of fury. "You'll regret this. You can't survive without me." However, his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. As the days passed, my preparations for the court battle became more intense. I obtained financial accounts, documented their harsh remarks, and gathered evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I was arranging my documents, my kid approached me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" His voice was soft and hesitant. I drew him into an embrace, feeling a flash of protectiveness. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life, just you and me." His arms tightened around me, and I knew I'd made the correct decision. I was fighting not just for myself, but also for my son's future. The court hearing date approached, bringing with it the prospect of impending freedom. I was prepared to confront Alex and Mrs. Whitmore and put an end to their tyranny and emotional abuse. I was ready to take back my life and give my son the peace and happiness he deserved. It was time for justice, and I was determined to see it delivered. The court hearing day arrived, and I was filled with both dread and determination. I felt a sense of surrealism when I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in court. This was the moment when everything changed. The proceedings started with frigid formality. Alex's lawyer portrayed him as a dedicated spouse and parent battling under unjust accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the sorrowful mother-in-law who had been wronged by her ungrateful daughter-in-law. However, their performance was apparent, and their lies were flimsy. When my turn came, I spoke clearly and steadily. "I've been the only provider for this family for years. My husband's unemployment and his mother's manipulative behavior have been continual sources of stress." Alex intervened, his voice tinged with feigned hurt. "Alara, how can you say such things? I've always backed you." I turned to him, my stare steadfast. "Alex, support is more than words. It's about deeds, and your actions have only demonstrated selfishness and harshness." The judge listened closely as I presented my evidence, which included financial accounts, audio recordings of their verbal abuse, and testimony from neighbors who witnessed their behavior. The fact was undeniable. As the evidence accumulated, Alex's facade began to collapse. Mrs. Whitmore's poise shattered, and her innocence slipped away. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anxiety. Then came the realization that sealed their doom. My lawyer submitted photos and documentation confirming Alex's adultery and Mrs. Whitmore's clandestine affair with Mr. Harwood, a wealthy neighbor. Murmurs broke out in the courtroom as the photographs of them in compromising postures were shown. Their lie was exposed for all to see. Alex's face became ashen, his eyes wide with surprise. Mrs. Whitmore's face twisted into rage, and her hands trembled. You compromised our privacy," she yelled, her voice shrill. I glanced at her, my voice steady yet forceful. "I revealed the truth, which you both had been hiding for far too long." The court shouted for order, but the harm was already done. Their credibility was shattered, and their lies were revealed in the bright light of the courtroom. As the session concluded, the judge's conclusion was apparent. I was given full custody of our son, and a fair distribution of assets was ordered. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with just their destroyed reputations. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. The years of deception and emotional assault had finally ended. I had confronted my oppressors and emerged victorious. But the finest moment was when my son raced into my arms outside the courthouse, his face beaming with relief and joy. "We did it, Mom," he exclaimed, his voice full of delight. "Yes, we did," I said, holding him close. "We're free now. This is only the beginning for us." As we walked away hand in hand, I realized this was more than simply a personal win. It was a victory for everybody who has ever been made to feel little, helpless, or unworthy. It represented a victory for truth and justice. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one full of optimism and the promise of a better future. The court verdict had an immediate and chaotic impact. The story of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deception spread like wildfire, ruining their reputations in our little neighborhood. They could no longer hide behind their facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, I concentrated on rebuilding my life with my kid, but I couldn't deny the gratification of knowing Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the repercussions of their decisions. One evening, as I was making dinner, I had an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Harwood, Mr. Harwood's wife, appeared, her eyes crimson from unshed tears. "Alara, I've heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore, did," she exclaimed, her voice breaking. I invited her in and offered a cup of tea. As we sat at the kitchen table, she expressed her sadness. I trusted her as a neighbor and friend. And to think she was having an affair with my husband. Her voice trembled, so I listened and offered words of comfort. Mrs. Whitmore's actions had clearly caused far more damage than she had planned. The next day, I saw Alex in town. He was a shell of his former self, his arrogance replaced with a defeated expression. "Alara, please. Can we speak?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I paused, facing him. "What's there to talk about, Alex?" He fidgeted, unwilling to meet my gaze. I apologize for everything. I didn't understand how much I relied on you and your strength." His apologies, however late, reflected the shift in power. He had lost everything, his dignity, his home, and his family, and in that loss, he had finally admitted his own flaws. Mrs. Whitmore, however, received the greatest criticism. Her affair with Mr. Harwood had not only wrecked her reputation but also resulted in legal problems. Mrs. Harwood sought a divorce and sued her for alienation of affection. I learned of Mrs. Whitmore's dilemma from neighbors. Whispers and tales depicted a lady undone by her own acts. She had become an outsider, rejected by individuals she had previously considered friends. I saw her at the grocery store one day, hurrying through the aisles with downcast eyes. Our paths touched, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. The sight of hatred and defeat in her eyes was undeniable. "You did this to me," she said under her breath as she walked by. I watched Sylvia leave, her figure slowly fading as she hurried away, her eyes filled with resentment. I felt a strange mix of pity for her and vindication for myself. "No, Sylvia," I whispered under my breath. "You did this to yourself." The tides of justice had finally shifted. Everything they had done to me, all the lies, the manipulation, the emotional torment, had come full circle. The consequences of their actions were now irreversible. I could see them struggling, living in the aftermath of the deceit they had carefully cultivated over the years. Their false facade had shattered, and now they were forced to face the reality of what they had become. As I watched them suffer through the consequences of their own making, I felt a sense of calm satisfaction. But it wasn't just about them getting what they deserved. The real reward was in the freedom I had gained. The best form of retribution, I realized, was not in revenge, but in living a life full of peace and strength, free from the toxicity and harmful influence they had cast upon me for so long. My focus shifted back to what truly mattered, the future I was building with my son. We were free now, free from the prison they had trapped me in for all those years. I had broken free, and now, I was living the life I had always dreamed of. This wasn't just a story of revenge or victory, It was a story of liberation. It was a powerful testament to my strength and resilience. I had taken control of my destiny, broken the chains of abuse, and freed myself from the tyranny of their manipulation. As I looked ahead, I knew that the future was bright, and the best was yet to come. I was no longer a prisoner to their cruelty. I was free, and the world was mine to conquer. I chose my stepfather to walk me down the aisle, and now my dad is begging for a second chance after seeing the photos. I was escorted down the aisle by my stepfather. After seeing the pictures, my dad broke down in tears and is now pleading for a second ceremony. I got married yesterday. When my dad eventually arrived in the evening after everything was finished, we spoke in a way that brought tears to his eyes. I feel terrible now because of that. To put things in perspective, I became engaged to my fiancée approximately 5 months ago. We chose to get married in our garden with just our loved ones because neither of us wanted a large wedding with lots of guests in a vast location. Our goal was to have a modest, intimate, and private wedding. Since we were getting married on the day of our 4th anniversary, this was a really memorable day for us, who had been together for 4 years. We still had decorators and caterers coming in, so it was obviously not possible to reschedule, despite the little wedding. I was unable to grant my dad's plea to postpone it because of this. I didn't want to because I didn't think it was necessary, more than the fact that I couldn't. My dad wasn't asking me to postpone my wedding because of an urgent matter. My golden child brother was in town and had planned a camping trip for the same weekend, so he wanted me to put it off. I'm not making it up, I promise. This is so ridiculous that I doubt I could ever create it. I couldn't think of a single medical emergency that would require him to wait a week that couldn't be rescheduled. So when my dad called me last week, he said he wouldn't be able to attend my wedding if I held it that weekend because he had a medical emergency. It was a weak excuse. My brother had surprised him with a camping trip, which he had consented to go on, but it happened to fall on my wedding day. I persisted until he finally told the truth. The camping trip was my dad's top priority, but I think it's very clear what the decision should have been. He clarified that he didn't want to miss out on spending time with my brother, who only visits for a few weeks per year. My dad also tried to persuade me that since my wedding wasn't a big occasion, it would be simple to reschedule. He maintained that all I needed to do was talk to the merchants and let a few people know. I made an effort to explain why the wedding date was significant to me, but I soon saw that it was useless. He was going camping with my brother and had already made up his mind. My dad has always given preference to my brother, so I wasn't surprised by this. 3 years older than I am, my brother, 30M, has always been an overachiever. In the meantime, I've been a typical child. Naturally, he received a lot of attention and was constantly complimented, while I frequently felt ignored. He was such a brat with an inflated ego that I was unable to be glad for him. Even though I used to feel jealous of him. He became conceited from all the attention and honestly thought he was a gift from God to humanity. We never got along since he was annoying and behaved like a bully to me. When he left for college, I was relieved. I was in middle school when our parents got divorced. My mom had an affair with one of her college pals, which led to the divorce. My dad agreed to split custody despite the unpleasant divorce that left everyone bitter. The affair was shocking. Not the divorce, to be honest. My parents had a constant argument for as long as I can remember. They were never really happy together, even in my fond childhood memories. During family get-togethers or vacations, they simply put on a front for other people. They hardly ever talked or even looked at one another at home. They eventually slept in different rooms. They probably stayed together for the purpose of staying together after falling out of love. My mom had her affair because neither of them tried to make things better. My dad had never been a pleasant man to live with, and I'm not attempting to defend her. Their marriage was going through a particularly difficult period when my mom had an affair. They got into violent arguments nearly every day, and my dad's heavy drinking just made matters worse. My mother eventually came clean about the affair and left the family one day. She still made an effort to communicate with us both, though. My brother entirely disregarded her messages, and I was the only one who replied. She had cheated on our father, and he could never forgive her. My brother's inability to forgive her wasn't shocking. He and my dad have always shared a unique bond. Even though my dad denied it, it was clear from the time we were young that he had a favorite. It was evident from his conduct. My relationship with my father deteriorated as we grew older. My dad appeared to be upset with me after the divorce when I made the decision to keep up a friendly connection with my mom and stepdad. He became aloof. He probably wanted me to behave like my brother, who was often disparaging our mother and her new husband. A few months after the divorce was finalized, my mom got married again, and I was a bridesmaid at her wedding. My brother declined to go. My brother was forced to spend half the month with my mother because she had partial custody, regardless of his sentiments. My brother didn't like that my mother didn't play favorites, therefore those weeks were unbearable. He was unable to escape punishment for his misbehavior at her home. My dad made multiple attempts to request full custody, alleging that my mom and her spouse were abusing my brother. He failed because his claims were unfounded. Looking back, I'm happy. I only had one parent who truly cared about me, my mother. I didn't despise my stepfather. He was a good man as well. I had mixed feelings toward my mother as a child. I wasn't sure if I should forgive her for cheating on my dad. I ultimately made the decision to follow my happiness. I put money into maintaining a positive relationship with my mother because it made me feel at ease. I'm glad I did. 6 years ago she passed away from cancer. What mattered was that she was always a good mother to me, regardless of the events in her marriage. My brother was scarce, even in her last days. Before she passed away he did pay her a few visits, which gave her some serenity. My stepdad moved out of state when she passed away, but we continued to communicate. The repercussions of my mother's death. My brother acquired a job in London and moved there around a year after my mother's death. Now he comes to see our dad once a year. I don't talk to my brother anymore. However, my connection with my dad started to become better once my brother moved out and my mom passed away. After finding out about my mom's infidelity, he expressed regret for his lack of warmth for me. He acknowledged that he had acted in ways he wasn't proud of, particularly toward me, since he felt deceived and hurt. He tried to improve our relationship and admitted that he had always given my brother more attention. We've become closer over the last few years, which I never imagined was possible. I asked him to lead me down the aisle at my wedding because I thought things had improved. He concurred. As long as he showed me love and respect, I didn't mind that he was still very close to my brother. The ultimate camping trip. But recent events made it clear to me that as long as my brother was alive, I would never really be a priority. I came to see that my brother's relocation away was the only reason my dad even made an effort to patch things up between us. I become less important when my brother is around. It was a terrible wake-up call when my dad asked me to reschedule my wedding so that I could go camping with my brother. The realization that things hadn't altered as much as I had thought was painful. I made a snap decision in the heat of the moment. I consented to postpone my wedding. I called my stepdad a few minutes after I hung up with my dad. I invited him to lead me down the aisle without thinking twice. I'll admit that what I did at the time was spiteful and motivated by retaliation. But I believed that I was being good for myself by reprimanding my father. I didn't mind my stepdad filling in because he was already invited as a guest to the wedding and he's always been a good man. Even though we don't communicate often, we are still close because he helped me get through my mother's burial. He was first hesitant to accompany me down the aisle as he knew my father was also invited. Nevertheless, I persuaded him and he accepted. I felt justified, so I didn't think about it too much. My fiancé's encouragement provided me with the necessary validation. My annoyance was exacerbated by the fact that my dad had hardly communicated with me during the preceding week, perhaps because my brother was back in town. As anticipated, my dad did not attend my wedding yesterday. I waited until the very last minute in the hopes that he would surprise me. However, he didn't. For the most part, I was content as my stepdad led me down the aisle. After all, it was my wedding day. Later, when I emailed my dad a picture of my stepdad escorting me down the aisle, that was the only hitch. I assumed he would be upset. I was surprised when he decided to confront me on the following bus back to town. My father and brother showed up that night as the visitors were departing. They appeared worn out, but my dad said the most. He urged me to have another ceremony so he could lead me down the aisle and expressed regret for not taking my wedding seriously. He acknowledged that I was justified in my conduct and that it was rude to ask me to reschedule for a camping trip. All he wanted was another opportunity, and he regretted everything. He even declared that he only wanted the joy of seeing his daughter go down the aisle and didn't care if no one else showed there. I was offended by his desperation. It became evident that his activities were motivated more by a desire to outdo my stepdad than by a genuine concern for me. I asked him if, had my stepdad not escorted me down the aisle, he would have responded in the same manner. His reluctance was sufficient enough. I informed him that he had let me down and that I would not be getting married again merely to please him. He blew the opportunity he had. He started crying and pleading for forgiveness when I ordered him to leave. He stated that he regretted everything after seeing the photos and that he had not known I was serious about holding the wedding. He adamantly apologized for not putting me first. He accused me of being callous and overreacting to a single error when I asked him to go once more. The final straw was that I informed him that I had every right to defend myself at this point if he could treat me badly for the rest of my life without good cause. I reminded him that his actions were the reason behind everything that was happening to him. Unlike him, my stepdad truly cared about me, so I told him I was happy he escorted me down the aisle. Then I left him crying and went back inside. My brother and father were gone when I looked out a while later. Considering I regret what I said now that some time has gone by. Knowing I brought him to tears makes me feel worse. I question whether asking my stepdad to escort me down the aisle and then putting it in my dad's face was too harsh. Revise. I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to apologize after giving it some serious thought. My dad decided to put a camping trip ahead of my wedding. I've been defending his actions my entire life, and I'm sick of it. My dad's actions have no justification, and I am free to choose not to forgive him. I'm sorry for bringing him to tears, but a person can only take so much abuse. Beyond that, I think it's okay to defend your rights, even if doing so causes harm to the other person. I cried a lot during my early and adolescent years due to my dad's treatment of me. I never showed anyone how much it hurt me, not even him. I don't think he would have changed even if he had known. I'm happy that I didn't get in touch with him once more. My husband supports me and says it's the appropriate decision after we chatted about it. He wanted this decision to be mine alone, which is why he didn't voice his opinion sooner. I also expressed my guilt to my stepfather for becoming involved in my problems with my father. I even said I was sorry for using him as a means of retaliation. He assured me, though, that it didn't concern him. He knows how much I cherish him, and he felt gratified that I considered him first. My guilt was lessened by his comprehension, and I'm happy he doesn't take offense. I think it's obvious now to everyone who was upset with me for bringing up my stepdad. He doesn't mind. I don't mind my choice as long as he's cool with it. Drama after the wedding. Since the wedding a few days ago, my dad has been phoning and texting me daily. I don't want to hear what he has to say, therefore I haven't even opened or replied to his messages. I've made the decision to put my attention on my upcoming honeymoon with my spouse rather than this issue. First update. My dad called again this morning. I chose to read his messages for the first time even though I didn't answer. They were all apologies, as one might anticipate. He agreed that I had every right to be angry. Said he hadn't been a good father, and begged for another opportunity to make things right. He acknowledged his prejudice against my brother and vowed to make every effort to mend our friendship. I felt depressed after reading those messages. The entire scenario is quite distressing. But I've decided that I need space. I contacted him back to establish boundaries after reading the messages. I requested that he refrain from contacting me for a time because I was going on my honeymoon. Repeated apologies just serve to prolong the suffering. They won't alter the past. I made it obvious that I needed him to honor my wishes, but I also vowed to get in touch when I was ready. I understand, he said, adding that he would wait for me to get in touch with him. Second update. As I enter the third day of my honeymoon, my father has not gotten in touch with me. But my brother contacted me out of the blue today, and it was totally unnecessary. I didn't recognize the number since he was using a burner phone. I was going to hang up when I heard his voice and responded, but he baited me by calling me an escapist. Sadly, it was successful because he is skilled at making me feel uncomfortable. My brother gave me a lecture on the value of family, saying I should apologize for the terrible way I was treating our dad. Additionally, he bemoaned how uncomfortable my dad was and how I had ruined his visit by cutting short their camping trip. He went on to accuse me of being envious of him, saying that my behavior was motivated by resentment because my father put him before me. He further claimed that by continuing to see our mother during the divorce, I betrayed my father. His childishness astounded me, but I wasn't shocked. I informed him that a man-child like him would act in this way. I explained that I actually felt sorry for him and wasn't at all envious of him. My sibling is still emotionally stunted despite having a successful profession. Whatever he accomplishes, he will always be unhappy and unlikable. I interrupted him when he attempted to argue with me, stating that it would only serve to highlight his desperate attempt to hide his discontent. I ended the phone before he could say anything else. Even though I know I shouldn't have talked to him at all, it was rewarding in its own right. I made the decision to only take calls in an emergency from that point on for the remainder of my trip. Update 4. Talking to my dad. A few days ago, I came home from my honeymoon. After a while of staying in holiday mode, my husband and I decided it was time to return to our regular life and our jobs. I made the decision to face my father yesterday. I went to his residence after work. Naturally, my brother was also present and he appeared astonished to see me. Since I don't care about him, I gave him my full attention. I didn't want to have any serious conversations with my brother, so I asked to talk to my dad alone. I was certain that he would be unable to be silent and would continuously interrupt, and I couldn't stand it. My dad and I were finally alone when my brother left the room, albeit he appeared to be upset about it. When we were alone, I expressed my disappointment in my father's actions. I reminded him that I had asked him to lead me down the aisle because I felt our relationship had improved over the previous few years. But it became evident what his priorities were when he requested me to reschedule the wedding. My stepdad is significant to me in his own right, but I acknowledged that asking him to lead me down the aisle was selfish and vengeful of me. I informed my dad that I still didn't know if he had come that day because he truly regretted missing my wedding or because he felt competitive with my stepdad. In any case, it was no longer relevant. We cannot undo the past. What has been done is done. A way forward for reconciliation. He initially appeared to be very distraught, but I assured him that starting over was the only way to move on. I am aware that a lot of people would anticipate that I would completely cut him out of my life, but in all honesty, I don't want to or can live with that. I know how quickly life can take individuals away because I lost my mother to cancer. I can't ignore the positive times I've had with my father, even with all the negative ones. But I also can't deny the pain he's given me. I clarified that I had reached a point of acceptance. I'm willing to give him another chance to make amends for his mistakes from now on. I urged him to allow me that space though, because I need time to recover. We can attempt to mend our father-daughter relationship when I feel ready, which could take weeks, months, or even years. I wish to avoid touch till then. I asked him if he could accept this and he nodded. Before I left, he asked if he may give me a hug. It was emotional when we hugged, but I held back from crying until I was back in my car. In conclusion, we decided on that, and I believe it works, at least for the time being. The course of events will become clear with time. I'm comfortable with the situation for the time being. Am I the asshole for calling my father's wife a creep after she crossed boundaries with my daughter? Original, my 32F father, 60s, has been married to Sasha. Fake name, 40s, for almost a decade. I was already an adult when they started seeing each other, so I never had much of a relationship with her. That said, Sasha was nice and thoughtful, though a bit annoying at times, and I never had any problems with her. I now have a husband, 34M, and 2 kids, 9M and 4F. Sasha is very fond of my children. Especially my daughter. That became very suffocating pretty quickly, so we started setting some boundaries. She never overstepped them. In January, my father and Sasha decided to go on a trip to Disney World, and invited us to join them. We decided to go to celebrate our son's 9th birthday. I quickly regretted coming along. Sasha spent the entire trip fussing over my daughter in ways that overstepped almost every boundary we'd set. Examples include, Sasha bought a mini ears tiara. She wanted me to buy my daughter an identical one so they could match. My daughter didn't like the tiara, so I bought her a Donald Duck hat instead. Sasha got her the tiara anyway, and was upset that she didn't want to wear it. My father and Sasha went shopping in between parks. I told them not to buy my kids anything, as we still had shopping to do and didn't want to risk making our bags too heavy. Still, Sasha returned with 5 bags of clothing for my daughter, and 2 for my son, saying she couldn't resist it. My daughter wanted a Belle costume to wear at the parks, as that's her favorite princess. Sasha tried to convince us to get her an Ariel costume instead, because that's her favorite. I explained that we never watched The Little Mermaid at home because my daughter is scared of Ursula. Sasha insisted on taking dozens of pictures with my daughter in front of the castle at Magic Kingdom. She also took some with my son, but not nearly as many. She tried to convince us to take our daughter to Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. We refused because the prices are crazy and we'd already bought her the Belle costume. She offered to pay, but we held our ground. I later found out Sasha tried to make a reservation anyway, but there was no availability. When we took our daughter to Slinky Dog Dash, her first roller coaster, Sasha tried to sit next to her. My daughter wanted to sit with me, so we switched. She tried to do the same thing in other attractions. At the Muppets Theater, she tried to get my daughter to sit in her lap. Sasha also tried to pick her up while we met some of the characters. There were more instances. The final straw for me, however, was the last park day of the trip. We were at Magic Kingdom. My husband suffered a minor injury and I had to take him to the first aid station. The kids wanted to go to the Peter Pan ride, so my dad and Sasha offered to take them in the meantime. However, according to my father, the line was too long. So instead, Sasha suggested the Little Mermaid ride, assuring my kids Ursula wasn't on it. Actually, there's a pretty big Ursula animatronic there. My daughter was still sobbing and hugging her brother when we reunited. When we flew back home, I told my father that we'd no longer take our children on trips with Sasha due to her behavior. He got extremely angry. He said his wife loved my kids, thought about what they'd like to do at every moment of the trip, and that we should be grateful to have her in our lives. I lost my temper at that. I told him Sasha was a fucking creep, and that they should be grateful I was still okay with them even seeing my children after her actions during the trip. We ended up having a huge fight after that. It's been weeks since we returned home, and my father is still angry at me and my husband. Sasha has texted me a few times. She says she's sorry if she made me uncomfortable, but that she loves my kids and hoped to use the trip to spend more time with them. To be honest, I don't think I'm the here. But I do think I might have overreacted. I believe there's a chance Sasha's actions were motivated by love and she truly did have good intentions. AITA. Update. Hey everyone, I'm ready to give you an update. I read your comments and came to the following conclusion. As much as Sasha's behavior towards my children angered me and freaked me out, calling her a creep was the wrong reaction to have. That said, I think it's best for my family to distance itself from Sasha for the time being. And at the very least, my previous decision to avoid future trips with her based on the Disney trip is still the best course of action. Sasha's pushiness, tendency to override my and my husband's parenting and blatant favoritism towards my daughter were much worse when the kids were younger. After my daughter's birth, she began to focus too much attention on her and almost none on my son. I gave more examples of that in the comments on my original post. That's the reason we set boundaries in the first place. Her fixation on my daughter also bothers me. When we had the boundary conversation with my father and Sasha, she told us that she'd always wondered what having a daughter would be like. She'd also defined herself as child-free before, so I was never certain what to think of that. Either way, that reassured me and my husband that we were doing the best for our kids. Those boundaries had never been overstepped. Then we went on the Disney trip and most of them were completely ignored. Many of you pointed out that she might have gotten carried away, or that Disney is exciting and she wanted to make sure my kids had the best experience, etc. There are two things I'll say to that. The first is that whatever Sasha's reasons were, she still overstepped our boundaries. When we first set those, we told her that doing so would have consequences. Disney or not, I don't see a reason to make an exception. Secondly, she wasn't trying to ensure my kids had the best experience. She was pushing them to fulfill her fantasy of what their Disney trip should look like. She repeatedly ignored my children's wishes in favor of her own, despite them both being very clear about what they wanted and didn't want. Sasha also continually favored my daughter, including during my son's birthday, and fussed over her in ways that made her uncomfortable. And I still haven't forgiven the Little Mermaid thing. My daughter is a bit shy and takes a while to open up to most people, so knowing her trust was broken like that angers me in ways I can't describe. To put it in simpler terms, my children aren't props. And whoever treats them as such will, at the very least, be put in timeout. I called my father and Sasha on Saturday. I apologized for calling Sasha a creep, but told them that we needed some time apart. They won't see my family until my younger sister's birthday in late April. If that goes well, they'll be invited to my daughter's 5th birthday party in May. After that, we'll slowly work on re-establishing contact. I also said that if they overstepped our boundaries again, the consequences would be more dire. My father didn't take it well. I don't care. Sasha sent me a text with more apologies, followed by a request to at least FaceTime my kids every now and then. I said no. And to those who said my controlling behavior ruined the trip. My kids had an amazing time at Disney World. They're both still talking about it. My daughter keeps asking us to put her pictures with the characters she met up on the wall, and my son says he had the best birthday ever. I think that's it. Thank you for your advice and support on my first post. Update 2. Last time I posted here, I mentioned that my father and Sasha wouldn't see my children until my younger sister's birthday. The party took place last weekend, and we didn't attend. These 2 months of NC worked fine, but not great. My father respected my wishes, to my surprise, but Sasha kept trying to find ways to talk to my children. She'd call me under the guise of needing to ask me something, only to later say, "By the way, are the kids around? I want to say hi." Every time she tried that, I'd remind her of what I'd told her back in March. This must have happened almost a dozen times, which was enough for my husband and I to start debating on skipping the party. After speaking to our kids, we decided not to go. They both said they missed my father, but clearly didn't want to see Sasha. We thought about attending and just distancing them from her while there, but risking making our children uncomfortable wasn't worth it. My son even asked if we could see their aunt somewhere else, without Sasha around. My husband and I explained the situation to my sister. She was upset, but mostly because she hadn't seen the kids in a while. We all went to dinner at her favorite restaurant the day after her party. I also called my father and told him we wouldn't go to the birthday party. He reacted better than I expected, but we still had a short fight about it. He claimed that I had promised we'd let Sasha see the kids after 2 months, called me unfair and said he was entitled to have a relationship with his grandchildren. I immediately denied that. Though I tried to sugarcoat it at first, I eventually gave him the truth. My kids don't want to see his wife and I won't force them to. My father and I had a long talk. I told him how much Sasha's actions at the Disney trip upset my children, as well as how uncomfortable me and my husband felt. I admitted I don't trust his wife at all, and I don't think I ever truly will. He said that while he still thought I was overreacting, he understood I wanted to protect my kids. My dad also told me about how these 2 months of NC were for them. Apparently, Sasha started talking about my kids, mostly my daughter, a lot more than usual. She'd mention things and places she thought they would like. My father was aware of one of the times she called me, but thought it was a one-time thing. She wanted to give my daughter a gift at my sister's birthday party. He said he didn't know why. At one point, she told him she wanted to plan another family vacation with the kids, even though I told them they're not traveling with Sasha anymore. Learning all of that just made me more certain that I can't trust this woman around my children. For now, I intend to remain LC with my father and NC with Sasha. My daughter told me she wanted her grandpa at her birthday party a few weeks from now, so I told him that he was invited, but Sasha wasn't. He agreed. To be honest, I don't trust my father after all of this. I'm allowing him to come because that party will take place at my home, which is easier for me to control. If he tries to bring Sasha, they'll both be kicked out, and it will take a long time for me to consider letting him near my kids again. My father hasn't told me how his wife is reacting to this. My sister told me that during her party, Sasha asked her to tell me she wanted to talk. I'm not reaching out to her, nor do I plan to respond if she attempts to contact me. Both me and my husband have blocked her. My children are doing great. They still talk about how much fun they had at Disney. My daughter's been saving money, putting coins in her piggy bank, for us to go back. On a completely different note, I'm pregnant again. This was completely unplanned. I always said I wanted 2 kids at most, and the third would have to be a huge accident. But my husband and I are ecstatic. I'm still in the first trimester, so not a lot of people know. We're brainstorming ways to tell our kids. Overall, I'm happy with my life right now. And as much as I wish this Sasha situation had never happened, I feel like a better parent after dealing with it. I have never been more confident in my abilities to protect my children than I am now. I don't think I'll update again anytime soon. Once again, thank you for all the support you've given me. I wish you the best. Update 3, September 3, 2024. 7 months later. First of all, my father didn't bring Sasha to my daughter's birthday party back in May. I didn't really think he would. I'd made it very clear I wouldn't tolerate that, but I'd be lying if I said your comments didn't make me a little paranoid. Secondly, I've just entered my 3rd trimester, and the baby will be here in November. The kids are ecstatic. I'm having another girl, but my husband and I are not sharing the sex until she's born. This has nothing to do with our families, it's just something we've also done with our first 2. Everyone, including Sasha, knows I'm pregnant. We announced it a couple months ago. I had no problem with my father telling her, though he did ask if he could. I didn't hear much about her reaction, but according to my father, she was happy for me. My children still don't want to see Sasha, and I'm still not forcing them to. I've unblocked her and put her on mute instead, but she hasn't made any attempts to contact me. We've continued meeting my father without his wife and I think it's been working out. My relationship with him isn't fantastic, but it's much better than it was earlier this year. Last week, I saw Sasha for the first time in months. My cousin threw a party at her place. My husband and I attended, as did my father and Sasha. I knew she'd be there, but since the kids weren't with us, son had a sleepover, daughter stayed with my mom, I didn't really have anything against seeing her. They arrived sometime after we did. My husband and I spoke with them for a few minutes, and it was less awkward than I expected. Sasha asked me about the baby's sex, and I told her we weren't telling anyone, which, again, is what we've always done. About 20 minutes later, my father told me they had to go. I thought it was weird that they were leaving so soon, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He called me a few days ago and we spoke for a long time. My father is difficult to talk to, so the following is what I gathered from the conversation. He said they left early because Sasha was holding back tears after she saw me. She was sobbing by the time they got to the car. They later had a discussion about it, and Sasha admitted she wanted kids. She married my dad knowing he didn't but hoped he would change his mind. Apparently, When my son was born, Sasha tried to drop "I want one" hints to my father. He didn't notice it, so she gave up. According to my father, Sasha told him she loved my kids equally, but my daughter was special, because she always imagined herself as a girl mom. That's also the reason why she became such a suffocating presence when my daughter was a baby. When my husband and I started setting boundaries, Sasha realized she was overstepping and agreed to abide by them. To her credit, I think she did a mostly okay job back then, but the favoritism was still obvious enough that my son noticed it. The trip we took was a turning point because Sasha's dream of having a daughter included taking her to Disney World and having her do all the things she liked to do there when she was young. She told my father that having my daughter there was so exciting that she forgot everything I'd said about not overstepping. Sasha wanted a mother-daughter trip and tried to use my child for it. Sasha said she regretted her actions during the Disney trip, but only because she lost access to my children due to them. And seeing me at the party, all pregnant and pretty, my father's words, not sure she actually said that, was what drove her over the edge. I remember reading some comments theorizing that this was what was going on, but I still didn't really expect this. My father said he was telling me all this because his wife wasn't doing well, and he'd understand if I wanted to keep my kids away from her. Didn't expect that, either. I don't know what the future of their relationship will be, and I don't think my father does either. All I know is that if Sasha still wants to have kids, it almost definitely will not be with my father. Before all this, I was pondering about my third child's future in relation to Sasha. Now, I sincerely don't want her to be a part of my baby's life. This isn't a final decision, but I've been speaking to my husband about it, and he agrees with me. I don't think she's a bad person. I got some baby stealer comments on my previous update, but I don't think that's what's happening here either. But if the Disney trip proved anything to me, it's that Sasha is willing to be extremely selfish and disrespectful to get what she wants, even when my kids are involved. A couple months ago, my husband and I had a conversation with our son about the subject. He told us he dislikes Sasha for 2 reasons. She favors his sister and she doesn't listen to them. Honestly, that's all I need to know. Looking back at my own childhood, I feel like I was never allowed to have boundaries. I was always expected to put my schedules and preferences aside for others. It's important to me that my children don't go through that. If they don't want to see Sasha, they don't have to. I think that's all I want to say here. I'm doing well. I actually got some great news from work recently. My kids are thriving, and I'm excited to meet my third baby. Again, thank you guys. Update 3, new update. November 23, 2024, 9 months later. I'm happy to announce my daughter was born 2 weeks ago. She arrived a little earlier than expected, but she's perfect. My older kids are in love with their baby sister. And as much as I didn't plan to have a third child, I am truly glad I did. As I mentioned the last time I posted, my husband and I didn't announce the sex in advance when our first 2 kids were born. This time, I decided to give my father a heads up. After I found out about the whole girl mom thing, I became worried about how Sasha would react to the news I was having another daughter. Telling my father ahead of her birth would give him more time to prepare. So about a month ago, my father told Sasha I was having another girl. As expected, she didn't take it well. A few days after I gave birth, my father told me that he and Sasha were separating. They're not sure about divorce, but he thinks that's where they're headed. Sasha started talking to my father about having children around the time I made my last post. According to him, they started fighting about it when she tried to convince him to get his vasectomy reversed. I didn't know he had one. My father said Sasha cried when he told her I'd have another daughter, and they decided to separate a few days later. I'm not very informed about the situation, but my father did state that the decision was mutual. About a week ago, Sasha texted me. It started with her congratulating me for my daughter's birth, then evolved into what seemed like a farewell letter to my children. Not much about them stood out to me, though "you'll never understand the love I feel for your children" was an interesting statement. She talked about how much it hurt to know she'd never meet my baby, or watch my daughter become a big sister. Sasha told me I had tortured her by keeping my kids away, and it was that distance that made her accept she needed to be a mother. She deleted the text a few minutes after I finished reading it. I decided not to reply. I haven't been thinking much about the situation lately, but the more I do, the dumber I feel for not realizing Sasha wanted kids sooner. I remember she started talking about my father's future grandchildren long before I got pregnant with my son. Her behavior around my daughter, at least before the Disney trip, always felt weird to me, but I still never made the connection. I still don't dislike Sasha, but I think she brought this situation upon herself. As much as I recognize my father is far from innocent, he's always been very clear about not wanting more children. Sasha is 47 years old, And while I don't think I'd want to have kids at that age, I know people who have. If that's what she wants, then I wish her luck. We're also officially moving to Europe in 2025. The work-related news I mentioned in my previous update were really, really great. My husband and I had been hoping for an opportunity like this for a while. We're helping the kids make arrangements to maintain contact with their friends. Luckily, my daughter's best friend is my goddaughter. This will be my last update. I'm busy with my baby, and I'll definitely have a busy 2025 as well, so I don't intend to write about this anymore. I want to thank you all for the advice, reassurance and kindness you have shown me. I loved my best friend for years, but it nearly broke me. Here's how I finally moved on after a 5-year journey. Original post. Honestly, this is pretty straightforward. We met about 2 years ago and I instantly had a crush on the guy. I honestly thought our first few nights out were dates, up until the point he went on a rant about a girl he had a crush on after a few beers. At that point, my thought process was pretty much, okay, not dates, got it, and moved on with the intent of friendship. Except funny thing, turns out he checks all my boxes. I've never gotten along with anyone this well. People are shocked to find out, or well, not anymore, but up until about a year after we became friends, we haven't known each other for years and years. We have the same humor, like the same games and TV shows, agree on politics, want the same things in life, all well enough to get along, but still with enough differences that we can have conversations about it. We discover bands together, we help each other with work and writing papers. I call him when I'm sad and we both think it feels weird to not see each other for a week. Problem is, I'm completely head over fucking heels in love with the man and it is starting to get to the point where I don't know what to do. I thought it'd go away, but every time I meet him it's like I'm falling all over again. My friends have gone from teasing me about it to shooting me pitying looks whenever his name is brought up. My sister wants me to just stop seeing him. I go a week without talking to him and I think I'm starting to get over it, but whenever I see him again, it all comes rushing back. I don't know what to do. It hurts and it's not fun anymore. I've been on dates with some amazing guys who like me, but my feelings for my friend are stopping me from falling for someone else. It's starting to feel pathetic and at this point I see no good option. He's my best friend, the best I've ever had, and I just don't want to lose him. At this point I think asking him out would achieve that, since it's been so long since we met. I know the only way, for me personally, to get over someone is to stop seeing them, but I don't want to lose my best friend. The finishing touch keeping me on the hook are these looks he gives me. I've had other friends confirm he does this, because I was honest to God starting to think I was losing my fucking mind. Whenever we're out in a group, at a party or the pub, whenever I look over at him, it seems he's always looking at me. And these eye contacts last way too long to be normal. Like, a good 6-7 seconds of us just looking at each other across the table, or the room, or the bar. And he does this little smile. I've never seen it in any other situation. I don't know what it means. I have no idea why we do this or how it came to be, but it's the final fucking nail in this coffin of hopelessness I'm buried in right now. I don't know if I'm crazy and over-interpreting things, which is very likely, or if I should just give it a shot and ask him out, even though it might ruin the friendship, or just stop seeing him, or to just carry on and hope this feeling goes away at some point of the distant future. I'm so frustrated I want to cry. And have cried. A lot. I just don't know what to do here. TLDR, I'm in love with my best friend. It has become a huge problem in my life. When we've been drinking, he keeps looking at me in a way I'd describe as smitten, if it were any other person. I don't know what to do to get out of this hole of constant heartbreak and misery, and how to be able to move on to other guys. Update. So, hello. A little over 5 years ago I made a post on this subreddit looking for advice on how to handle my incredibly painful unrequited love for my best friend. I'd honestly forgotten about this until making a password reset on another account, and saw Tobbs 13 among my email search results. But as I read through the post, I remember how very comforting and terrifying the responses to my post was, being a more or less unanimous ask him out that scared my ass to death. Sorry that this isn't really a happy update, but I don't know. It felt weird seeing something I wrote in what feels like a different life and the people who responded seemed so genuinely kind and trying to help. I feel like I weirdly owe some kind of update. Especially for that one, dear, sweet commenter whose account is now deleted. I wish I had a way to reach out to them, because that was one of the most thoughtful comments I think I've ever gotten. And just to recap, with hindsight, I really was in love with this man and I had been for about 2 years. Like, full 9 yards in love. Struggling to breathe when he talked about someone else but still cheering him on because he deserved happiness levels of in love. If that sounds a bit like obsession to you, then that's because it probably was. The thing about unrequited love, the thing that really sucks about it is that it's incredibly hard to move on from. But until you do move on, your brain keeps obsessing about it to the point where it can be impossible to get anything done. It had been 2 years of that when I made that post, 2 years of pining and pain and an ever-growing pile of crushed hopes, and I think I was going a little bit insane, constantly swinging between butterflies and love highs when I was with my friend and the crushing feeling of rejection every time he'd say goodbye. And the obsession over things like how long he'd look at me. How long he'd let a hug last. How fast he'd respond to my texts, things which could either make or break my entire day depending on what the answer was. On to the actual update, after that primer. About a month and a half or so after I made that post, still trying to hype myself up to actually ask this man out, I accidentally became a head organizer for an event at the university I was studying at for the moment. Long story short, the person managing me was not kind. I was extremely overworked from the event on top of writing a thesis. I was equally stressed out in my private life due to the whole situation with my best friend, and I ended up going through a pretty severe case of burnout. Add on to everything that I'd developed an addiction to alcohol to try to handle everything, and was also experiencing what was most likely a drug-induced paranoid psychosis, and I was a mess. I ended up moving back in with my dad in September, and spent about a year doing nothing but sleeping, crying, playing Skyrim and going to rehab and therapy. Start of 2021, I went back to school, and slowly recovered. I've been sober since 2020, the paranoia hasn't completely gone away but it's more manageable. I used to think my landlord listened to me through a radon measurement device, and at least that's over. And I think I've got a work-life balance figured out that helps me not overwork myself or go into free time lethargy because I've got too much time off. It was long and painful, but I did it. If you're wondering where my best friend was in all of this, honestly, I don't know. I went back to look at our text messages and from what I can see he tried to call me a few times in early September. I didn't respond, and then nothing until around Christmas when he wondered if I wanted to meet up sometime. I said yes, and then never followed through. He hasn't texted me since January 4th, 2020. Now, to be clear, I don't blame him for not reaching out more. My non-responding is what killed that friendship. I know, because it also killed every other friendship I had at the time. I don't know, alcohol addiction, deep depression and crippling paranoia, may be a fair explanation to one day stop responding to any of your friends, but I still deeply regret those choices. If I were to make a relationships post today, it would be on how the fuck you word an apology after behavior like that, 5 years down the road. Sorry. I feel like this is starting to become a journal. I'm gonna stop my reflections there. So, about my love for my best friend, with some years of hindsight and therapy behind me, I don't think I was in love with him. I think I was in love with the idea of him, and I think I was obsessed for sure, but looking back, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I think a part of me really liked the fact that this was a person who so clearly wasn't interested in me. Genuinely, if he was, that would shock me to find out, because he spent 2.5 years ignoring the in hindsight very obvious attempts I made to deepen the relationship. Some examples include, him saying he's waiting for the right person, me responding, sometimes I feel like I already have. Do you ever feel like that? And him going, nah, I don't think so, me following that up with, maybe you just don't know, the heart is weird sometimes. And him going, I'm pretty sure I'd know. One time we talked about why people fall in love and I genuinely tried to convince him a deep friendship was all you needed, while he insisted that there needed to be a level of sexual attraction as well. I tried to get him to do that 36 questions that will make you fall in love thing with me. I kept trying to find excuses to hold his hand. Rest in peace. My palm reading career, you were nothing but a thinly veiled attempt at finger touching, and him resolutely never going along with it. Ditto, but with hugs, arm touching, and sitting just a little too close whenever we went out so I could hear him better, which he normally responded to by going, we should go outside so you can hear better if it's too loud in here. Very thoughtful, but very much not what the goal was. One night, when we were alone in my apartment after a club event, after a particularly long shared look, I asked him what he was thinking about in that kind of, I don't want to break the illusion soft voice you put on when you're really fucking close to someone you like, and his response was, I don't know if I agree that Gertz's metaphor about blinking makes that much sense actually. For context, we'd bickered about that earlier in the night, since we'd just read some article about it in class. I did not expect it to make a comeback at that point. Another night, when we were out together and there had been a lot of looks and closely leaned in laughing together, and he pulls me to one side by the hand to talk to me about something, heart racing, only to ask me if I know if one of my friends is single because he thinks she's really fucking cute and might have been looking at him all night. Looking back, At least some of this stuff is sort of funny. I have no idea if he knew or knows now that I was in love with him. I wouldn't be surprised if some of my old friends eventually told him, but of course he's never reached out about it. But yes, I think I kinda like the security of this person who clearly didn't like me back. Not that I was doing well with the heartache, but there's a certain kind of fucked up comfort that comes from pining for someone who doesn't want you back. Like, the highs I'd get when I got something that felt like confirmation made up for the lows of crying in my apartment stairway when I got home after a denial. Today, I mostly just feel so bad for him and ashamed of myself. Regardless of whether he knew or not, and I'm trying to cling to the fact that he seemed to at least continue wanting to be friends as some indicator that he never felt creeped out or uncomfortable, my behavior was pretty fucking creepy. And in the end, once I did get that distance between us, the feelings went away after some 6 months or so. My therapist recommended not meeting this person again, for my own sake, and by early 2020 I wasn't so painfully in love anymore. A while later I'd end up meeting a guy I clicked with just as much, who actually liked me back and showed it. We've been together for almost 3 years now, and are talking about starting to try for kids at some point soon. He'd like us to get married first, but is also insisting he wants to be the one to propose, so I'm just walking around waiting for the day. Even if it's not a huge surprise or secret, he just wants to get that moment of going down on one knee, and who am I to deny him? I'm slowly growing old and bored. I'm sober, I go to my boring, stable, middle career 9-5 job, I save for my retirement and traveling in the summers, I help my dad out on his farm. I crochet little animals for my newborn niece. I come home to a man who plays his silly video games. I play my silly video games, we go for walks and to the museum and bicker about whether to get fat on takeout or not. I have some regrets about how my early 20s ended up playing out, but by God, I wouldn't want to go back. TLDR, I didn't ask him out. Instead, I had a severe mental health crisis, stopped talking to all my friends, got sober, crawled my way back, and now looking back I'm surprisingly happy with how life turned out. Oh, and I genuinely did not exaggerate those looks, I remember them very clearly and once had a mutual friend comment on it. I still have no idea what was up with those. He doesn't strike me as a person who would try to keep someone on the hook or anything, more like he was just painfully socially oblivious. But I still wonder so much about those goddamn looks, man. Jealous stepsister tried to sabotage my wedding. I exposed her lies to her husband. Now they're divorcing and my parents blame me. Noah, 25M, my fiancé and partner of nearly 7 years, and I, 25F, recently got married. Everyone in my family, including my stepsister Charlotte, 24F, was invited to the wedding. When Charlotte was 8 years old and I was 9, our parents were married. Since we had previously known each other for a few years, we were okay with my mother's marriage to her father at the time. Prior to their marriage, our parents had been together for over 3 years. More precisely, she was 5 and I was 6 when we first met. We got along really well at first. Since I didn't have many kids to play with in my area, I was always excited when Charlotte and her father visited, and we had a blast. We kept up a good friendship as we got older, and up until middle school, I thought of her as a close friend. When we joined high school, things started to shift, and regrettably, a boy named Noah was the reason for it all. During my mother's pregnancy, my father had cheated on her with a friend. After being caught, he signed away his parental rights and decided he didn't want anything to do with us. We never saw him again after he and his girlfriend moved away. My mother didn't seek child support because my grandparents were wealthy and provided for her. I never met my biological father as a result. The first father figure in my life was my stepfather. Due to health issues exacerbated by pregnancy, Charlotte's mother had died when she was quite young. Full custody of her was with her father, and I was with my mother. Charlotte and I spent all of our time together when our parents moved in together after courting. It was great to have someone my own age as a buddy. Up until high school, Charlotte and I had a close relationship. We were in the same grade even though she was a year younger because she started school earlier than usual. We even took many classes together when we first entered high school. Among them was Noah, the new student at the school and a recent arrival to our town. He won my affection almost instantly, and sadly, Charlotte did too. Charlotte and I had dated other boys previously, but this seemed different since Noah was adorable and kind. I chose to speak with Charlotte after realizing that we both liked him. Out of respect for our relationship, we agreed that neither of us would approach him or attempt to date him. We believed that we would be able to get over our infatuation, but that wasn't the case. Because we took the same classes, the three of us became good friends and my affections for Noah deepened as I got to know him better. I maintained our relationship entirely platonic, even though it was obvious he was interested in me. He frequently flirted. Charlotte couldn't be harmed. We didn't talk about Noah at all since we knew it was a delicate subject. As folks were getting ready for prom in their senior year, everything came to a head. When Noah revealed that Charlotte had asked him to prom and acknowledged her affections for him, I was on the verge of accepting another guy's prom offer. That Charlotte would renege on her vow to not pursue Noah astounded me. I was offended, and that was inappropriate. Noah informed me, however, that he had rejected her since he simply considered her a friend. Since he loved me, he acknowledged that he had observed her flirting with him over the years but had never returned the kind. Noah admitted that he needed clarification, which is why he had come to me. I had maintained my distance from him in order to keep my word to Charlotte, even though he was making an attempt to express his affections for me. He wanted to know whether there was a chance for us because our senior year was coming to a conclusion and college was approaching. He begged me to be honest because he would move on and think about asking someone else to prom if I didn't like him. I was confused by that talk. It was unbelievable to me that Noah had been fond of me all this time while Charlotte had been covertly betraying our agreement. The idea that someone I considered a sister would turn on me was painful. I skipped the remaining classes and went home early after asking Noah for a day to consider my options. After finding out, I couldn't bear to see Charlotte. Charlotte pretended nothing had happened when she got home. She didn't tell Noah about her confession. I couldn't resist and went up to her. I inquired as to whether she had actually confessed her feelings for Noah and asked him to prom. She said it was none of my business right away, getting defensive. But because we had made a vow, it was very much my business. Out of respect for Charlotte, I had repressed my feelings for Noah for years, but I later discovered that she had been pursuing him behind my back. It was unfair. I was in love with Noah by that point, not just smitten. I put Charlotte's sentiments ahead of my own, but she was unable to reciprocate. Our argument turned into a violent altercation. In her own words, Charlotte acknowledged that she had only promised to spare my feelings, because she thought Noah would pick her over me if he had to. Her conceit and treachery were intolerable. I made the decision right then and there that I would no longer prioritize my feelings over hers. I told Noah everything the following day, including our argument, Charlotte's betrayal, and the commitment we had made. He was sympathetic and offered to wait for me if I required more time. However, I was no longer able to suppress my emotions. We began dating the same day I told him I was in love with him. I have no regrets after 7 wonderful years together. After that day, Charlotte and I ceased communicating. Since we shared a residence, it was more difficult for me to break off our relationship than it was for Noah. I didn't mind that she relocated into the basement rather than a room with me. I never told our parents what had gone wrong, and I don't believe Charlotte did either, despite their repeated requests. We didn't talk to each other after that day. It was challenging at first, but we gradually adapted. Charlotte decided to attend a college across the nation, but Noah and I ended up attending the same one. This implied that I would only have to visit her on special occasions for a few years. Charlotte had begun dating a man from her college and Noah and I were still together after graduation. Before long, we all started working, and Charlotte and I's argument began to seem like trivial high school drama. Charlotte and I would exchange courteous greetings during family get-togethers. We avoided in-depth discussions and stuck to casual banter, but we never tried to mend our relationship. Things began to change a little as we grew older, at least we could communicate. Charlotte told her college lover she was engaged last year. After I properly congratulated her, she expressed her desire for me to be present at her wedding. It was a bittersweet experience. We had always dreamed of being each other's maid of honor at our weddings since we were little. However, I was simply another visitor at her wedding. It was heartbreaking to know that our relationship would never be the same again, even though I was glad we were getting back on track and acting like grown-ups. We had been communicating ever since, and Charlotte even appeared to get along well with Noah. I thought it would feel weird, so I decided not to bring Noah as my +1 to her wedding out of respect. Charlotte said after the ceremony that she had moved on and didn't care anymore, so I could have brought Noah. For a time at least, I trusted her. Noah asked me to marry him a few months ago and I accepted without hesitation. The moment was ideal. I had begun working with a friend on her startup, and he had recently received a promotion at work. Although I had hoped for a drama-free, stress-free wedding, inviting Charlotte proved to be a mistake. When I got engaged, Charlotte congratulated me, and I assumed everything was good. She agreed to attend the wedding when I invited her. I didn't anticipate any problems. The majority of our close friends and relatives stayed with us at the hotel outside of town where the wedding was held. The majority of the guests arrived the day before the wedding, but Noah, our parents, my bridal party and I arrived 2 days early. But Charlotte and her spouse showed up on the same day as us, saying it was a sincere error. I didn't know what she had planned, but I accepted it because I thought her explanation was plausible. Charlotte was loitering outside my room on the morning of my wedding as I was getting my cosmetics done. The other guests were either unwinding or getting ready for the ceremony, so it looked strange. Her behavior felt odd, but I tried to ignore it. I had about 1 hour before the wedding when my mother and bridesmaids left to get dressed independently. I chose to go for a walk down the hallway outside my room since I was feeling anxious. I remained on the same floor since I didn't want anyone to see me wearing my dress. Charlotte stopped me at that point. "I need to talk about something important," she said, pulling me aside. I allowed her to speak out of curiosity, even though we hadn't had any private conversations in years. I was stunned by what she said. Charlotte disclosed that she had arrived early on purpose rather than by accident. According to her, Noah asked her to arrive early so he could speak with her privately. She said he had admitted that he had changed his mind and wasn't sure he wanted to marry me. According to her, Noah admitted to her that he had fallen in love with her and no longer loved me. He planned to elope with her, she said, and they had been communicating covertly for weeks. Even if her story was absurd, I was astounded by her sheer boldness. She was obviously attempting to ruin my wedding, but I wasn't going to allow it to happen. Charlotte stated their conversations were purely platonic, but she said she and Noah had been communicating behind my back for a while. She said, however, that Noah had fallen in love with her and begged her to come early so they could flee together. She claimed that ever since she got to the hotel, he had been putting pressure on her. She claimed he lacked the courage to face me head on because he was afraid I would respond wildly and he didn't want to be present. Then she said she had to be honest with me since she couldn't follow through. As usual with Charlotte, she felt that an hour prior to my wedding was the ideal time to come clean. I could tell she was lying right away. I knew Noah would never do such a thing since I had total faith in him. He was honest and would have spoken with me openly about any issues rather than using devious tactics. He found Charlotte's story to be totally out of character, and it was clear that she was attempting to spoil my special day by pretending to be worried about me. Her performance enraged me. She was intentionally attempting to generate drama where none didn't exist while feigning concern for me and our relationship. I made the decision to reverse her. I contacted her spouse and said nothing. I followed him on Instagram and called him using the app even though I didn't have his number. I looked like I might be phoning Noah while I stood in front of Charlotte, acting like I was inconsolable. Charlotte didn't stop me because she probably thought I was going to confront him or end our relationship, which was precisely what she wanted. She had no idea that I was actually phoning her spouse, who was located in another area of the hotel. I was relieved when her husband responded. I asked if any of what Charlotte had told me was real, and reiterated what she had said. Charlotte stayed mute at this point, probably believing that I was speaking to Noah. She was unaware that I had outwitted her. I put the call on speaker so Charlotte could hear her husband's response when he answered. He was so taken aback that he declared he would return to their room right away. Charlotte became alarmed when she noticed I wasn't talking to Noah. She began to yell at me, saying I was attempting to ruin her marriage. Calmly, I explained that I was just giving her a taste of my medicine. After that, I returned to my room and informed my bridesmaids about the situation. I no longer trusted Charlotte, so I told them to make sure she didn't go to the ceremony. I was relieved that Charlotte wouldn't interfere with the ceremony. She was probably too preoccupied with attempting to mend the harm she and her husband had made to show up. Except for our parents, who questioned me about her afterwards, nobody at the wedding seemed to notice her absence. I didn't intend to explain, but I told them I would later. I called the hotel to inquire about Charlotte's room after the celebrations. She and her husband had checked out during the wedding, which pleased me. I was happy that no one mentioned the event during the reception and was grateful that they were gone. As I had hoped, the wedding's aftermath was pleasantly quiet. After I told Noah what had transpired, we laughed heartily. We learned that Charlotte and her husband were divorcing 1 week after the wedding. It was my parents who told me. Charlotte's husband had apparently called them, screaming about how terrible she was and insisting that they come retrieve her from their home. If she didn't go, he threatened to contact the police. They discovered the cause for the split when they picked her up. Charlotte's willful attempt to ruin my wedding had greatly offended her husband. I had told him the whole story, and it seems that her friends had been telling him for a long time how amazing Noah was and how Charlotte should have been the one with him. Putting aside the foolishness of her friends, her husband realized that Charlotte still harbored affections for Noah and had attempted to sabotage my wedding as a result. The last straw for him was that understanding. She was still in love with someone else, despite her denials, so he made the decision to dissolve their marriage. He was unable to accept that. My parents blamed me for Charlotte's divorce for some reason. They maintained that I ought to have avoided her marriage in spite of her behavior. They claimed that I had destroyed her marriage by phoning her spouse. They stopped interacting with me when I refused to apologize to Charlotte. I was unable to comprehend how I was at fault for this. I didn't ask Charlotte to try to ruin my wedding or behave in such a careless manner. I just gave a kind response. My parents and many of our shared acquaintances supported Charlotte, while Noah supported me. It enraged me. Update 1. I became aware of how unjust my parents and some of my friends were after reading encouraging responses on my initial post. I made the decision to break things off. They would keep accusing me and making me feel bad if I didn't. Distancing myself felt like the only course of action since I wasn't going to break down and apologize to Charlotte. Ironically, my parents were getting exactly what they wanted after refusing to talk to me because I refused to apologize. My friends' support for Charlotte demonstrated to me that they were never really friends in the first place. I made the decision to put Noah and my happiness first. Update 2. I went on our honeymoon with Noah. Even though I missed my parents, I wasn't too upset about losing contact with my alleged friends because it had been almost 2 weeks since the wedding. But it was painful not to speak to my parents. I frequently wanted to phone or text my stepdad or mom, but I restrained myself because I knew they had sided with Charlotte. As far as I could tell, Charlotte was living with them and probably spreading false information to make them even more hostile toward me. I could see why my stepdad wanted to help his daughter, but given her history, I couldn't understand why my mother wasn't on my side. My dad had betrayed her by leaving her for a friend. Charlotte had attempted to do the same to me, but my mother did not recognize the similarity. I decided to concentrate on enjoying my honeymoon for the time being. I didn't want to let pessimism destroy this once-in-a-lifetime moment with Noah. Update 3. My mother texted me on the 3rd day of our honeymoon. In an effort to be present and prevent disappointment, I refrained from opening it until we got home. I didn't want anything to ruin the great time Noah and I were enjoying. Update 4. Reading my mother's message was the first thing I did when I got home. She clarified that after allowing Charlotte to stay with them for a few days, she and my stepdad decided it was no longer acceptable. They finally decided enough was enough after Charlotte spent the entire time disparaging me. They chose to exclude Charlotte after seeing she had made a concerted effort to spoil my wedding. My parents expressed regret for their previous actions, acknowledging that they had made bad choices because they were overtaken by Charlotte's divorce. To make things right, they asked Noah and I to join them for dinner. I am quite happy. In the hopes of repairing our relationship, Noah and I accepted their invitation. Everything works out in the end. I only hope that this kind of situation never arises again. I found out my parents funded my sister's secret family for years while ignoring my son's medical bills, leading to his death. I never thought I'd write this, but my family's tragedy has utterly ruined me. It tells the story of how my sister and dad betrayed me, causing my 2-year-old son to die. There were 4 of us growing up: my mom, 58F, a math teacher at the local high school; my older sister Sarah, 35F; my dad, 60M, a senior insurance agent at a large firm; and myself, 28F. We appeared to have a lovely life and lived in a nice area, but there was always one major issue: my parents' intense preference for Sarah. Favoritism began at a very young age. Sarah had ballet classes, painting lessons and piano lessons throughout elementary school. My parents told me we couldn't afford 2 kids participating in extracurricular activities when I begged to join any. While I wore her hand-me-downs, Sarah purchased new clothes from the mall. I used her old phones till they broke, but she always acquired the newest iPhone models. Sarah requested braces at the age of 13. Without hesitation, my parents paid $6,000. When my dentist informed me a year later that I also required braces, they indicated we would have to wait due to financial difficulties. I still have crooked teeth at the age of 28, and I never got them. Sarah received a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday. They advised me to work and save money for a car of my own when I became 16. I only bought a used Toyota that broke down after 6 months of working at McDonald's after school for 2 years. All the way through high school, the trend persisted. While I had to work part-time jobs to pay for necessities like clothes and school supplies, Sarah was free to concentrate only on her education and enjoyable hobbies. When it came time for college, I had to start at a community institution, but Sarah attended a pricey elite university. My parents covered all of her costs, including a condo close to her college and a semester abroad in Paris. To pay for my textbooks and bus fare to school, I worked 2 jobs, one as a campus library assistant and another at a coffee shop. After transferring to State University, I was in my 3rd year when I met my spouse, James, 30M. He worked part-time at the college IT department while pursuing an engineering degree. I felt like someone actually cared about me for the first time when we started dating. James was also from a middle-class family, but when he was in high school, his parents died in a car accident. He worked hard to pay for college while living with his aunt during high school. Before we were married, we dated for 3 years. We were saving money for a down payment on a house, so I planned a little courthouse wedding, but James felt that since it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, I should have a genuine wedding. We organized a little ceremony for perhaps 50 people in a nearby church. Sarah said she had an important work meeting, therefore she didn't arrive. Sarah had arranged a family vacation for that weekend, so my parents nearly skipped it as well. When my mom's sister confronted them about it, they abruptly changed their plans. Tommy was born to me 2 years after we were married. With terrible morning sickness and gestational diabetes, the pregnancy was difficult from the beginning. The worst news arrived in 32 weeks. Doctors discovered Tommy's significant cardiac issue during a routine scan. They stated that beginning immediately after delivery, he would require multiple procedures over the course of his life. Despite our grief, James and I were committed to doing everything in our power to ensure our son's health. The day following Tommy's birth, his first surgery was performed. Although the majority of the $150,000 was covered by insurance, we still had to pay $30,000 out of pocket. We took out loans and spent all of our savings. James began putting in extra hours at his engineering job and taking on weekend freelancing work. I was caring for Tommy while working from home as a virtual assistant. Tommy had to have another operation 6 months later. I turned to my parents for assistance because we were already having trouble paying for the initial operation. They had just returned from a Mediterranean cruise with Sarah that lasted 2 weeks. I stated to them that we had previously sold our car and made every feasible cut while displaying all of our medical expenses. They claimed they couldn't help since they were facing financial difficulties. I didn't know the truth, so I trusted them. We barely made it for the following year and a half. James put in 80-hour weeks until he became so worn out that he passed out on the job. I started taking on additional virtual assistant jobs and began using eBay to sell items from our home. During this period, my parents took 3 family holidays with Sarah and gave her a brand new Mercedes for her birthday. They said that because Sarah worked well in finance, she was responsible for paying for all of these. This turned out to be a lie. Tommy deteriorated significantly last month. His heart suddenly stopped working correctly, necessitating emergency surgery that would have cost $50,000. We didn't have a method to get that much money fast, and our insurance had hit its annual cap. I begged my parents for assistance once more, this time down on my knees. I offered to sign a formal agreement promising to give them our house, double the money they owed, and anything else they desired. They declined once more, stating that recent medical expenses had depleted their savings. We were unable to pay for Tommy's surgery, therefore he passed away 2 days later. He had just turned 2. My parents claimed they had to assist Sarah with an urgent matter, so they barely stayed for 30 minutes at his burial. While tidying Tommy's room yesterday, I discovered my dad's old phone beneath the bed. He must have lost it when he was there 3 weeks prior. I checked the phone, which was still functional, and discovered hundreds of texts between Sarah and my parents. I learned the truth in this way, and it ruined what remained of our family. Sarah had been leading an entirely different life, one that none of us were aware of, according to the texts. She had 3 children in Florida with a man named Mark after 7 years of marriage. All this time my parents had been providing for them financially by giving them large sums of money each month. I read through all of the messages for 5 hours. My parents send Sarah $5,000 a month to cover everyday expenditures. Each of her 3 children attended a private school that they paid $2,000 a month for. They provided coverage for their family's trips to Hawaii and Europe. They spent $400,000 last year on a Hamptons vacation home. My parents even covered the cost of their weekly lawn care and house cleaning service. The most recent correspondence concerned Sarah's desire to purchase a beach property. My parents sent Sarah $75,000 for the down payment 5 days before telling me they couldn't save Tommy. Additionally, there were notes about the 3 new iPads and game consoles they had already purchased for Sarah's children as Christmas gifts. The gifts that each child received exceeded the expense of Tommy's surgery. Our monthly family dinner was held today. Every month on the last Sunday, my aunts, uncles, and cousins all gather at my parents' house. In an effort to keep the family close, my mom established this custom 5 years ago. Typically, about 25 individuals show there. Sarah consistently excused herself from these dinners by citing work obligations. I now know that she was in Florida with her clandestine family. I went to supper with my dad's phone. I used screen mirroring to link the phone to the TV after everyone had finished eating and gone to the living room for coffee. I displayed the financial transfers, the communications, and the pictures of Sarah's covert existence to everyone. I told her how my parents refused to help save their dying grandchild, but had paid her $75,000 for a beach house. My mother began to cry and reached out to give me a hug. I stepped back from her. Sitting there, my dad gazed at the floor. With a sneer on her lips, Sarah, who had actually attended this meal for the first time in years, simply sat on the couch. She informed everyone that I was being dramatic as usual and that they should realize that she had 3 children to support and so needed the money more. I questioned her about if Tommy's life was more important than her children. I was crazy for drawing similarities, she said. My mother made an effort to clarify that Sarah was their top priority as she had always required more assistance and had been more emotionally sensitive. My dad went on to say that they assisted Sarah because she lacked my strength and independence. My Aunt Susan questioned them about how they could afford to spend thousands on Sarah's beach mansion and still allow their grandson to die. My parents couldn't respond. Other family members began inquiring about the several occasions my parents and Sarah had taken out loans from them under the pretext of crises. Sarah became irate and said that I had no right to reveal her personal information. She claimed that if anyone learned about this circumstance, her children would suffer from trauma. I informed them that they were no longer my family. In order to purchase a beach property for Sarah, they witnessed the death of my son. I told them that their decisions had killed them, just as Tommy had died. Sarah began to yell that I was jealously attempting to ruin her life. She claimed that because our parents loved her more, I had always envied her. I banned their numbers after leaving their home. I was followed by several family members who promised to help me if I decided to file a lawsuit. Sarah and my parents have been blocked on social media by the majority of my cousins, but some relatives are emailing me to say that I went too far by disclosing Sarah's secret in public. They believe I ought to have dealt with it in private. James agrees with my decision to stop communicating with them, but he believes there was a better way for me to reveal the truth. I don't care anymore, but he is concerned about how this may impact our ties with our extended family. Instead of protecting their grandson's life, my parents decided to fund Sarah's opulent lifestyle, which is why my son is dead. Update. Since I revealed Sarah and my parents during the family dinner, a lot has transpired. Over the years, more relatives have come forward with tales of my parents' deceit and Sarah's manipulation. I'm more and more aware of their deceit with every new story. 3 days after the dinner, I received a call from my Aunt Linda. She sobbed as she informed me about last year's $30,000 loan to Sarah. According to Sarah, her oldest kid developed appendicitis and required emergency surgery. Because she didn't want another child to go through what Tommy had gone through, Linda spent all of her retirement funds to assist. Later, Linda learned that there was no operation. Sarah installed a pool and updated the kitchen at her beach house using the funds. The story of my cousin Emily was even worse. She visited my home last week and told me something that made me feel nauseous. Emily was engaged to Mark, Sarah's husband, 8 years prior. After graduating from college, Emily and Mark became engaged. They sent out invites, organized a lavish wedding, and Emily even purchased her own gown. Mark went missing 2 weeks prior to the wedding. He wrote a note stating that he wasn't prepared to get married. After having a breakdown, Emily required 2 years of therapy. She is aware of the reality now. While Mark was engaged to Emily, Sarah had been seeing him in secret for months. He was persuaded by Sarah to abandon Emily and follow her to Florida. My parents were well informed. They assisted Sarah and Mark in choosing their Florida home. 3 months after Mark's separation from Emily, they even went to their small, secret wedding. They were aware of Sarah's actions and watched Emily battle sadness the entire time. 2 more stories were then released. I was discovered on Facebook by Tom, Sarah's first husband. Sarah's previous marriage to Mark was unknown to me. Soon after graduating from college, Tom and Sarah were married and had a daughter. Sarah emptied their bank accounts and vanished when their daughter was 2 years old. She seized all of Tom's inheritance from his grandmother, along with $40,000 from their savings. Sarah informed everyone that she had to leave because Tom was abusive. Sarah's falsehoods cost Tom his job, his home, and almost their daughter's custody. In order to obtain child support for their now 15-year-old daughter, he had been looking for Sarah for years. Sarah's whereabouts were always known to my parents. They assisted Sarah in creating fictitious documents demonstrating that she was in danger from Tom and paid attorneys to contest Tom's custody claims. Everything became worse when James discovered something in our safe deposit box last week. Like they said they did for all their grandchildren, my parents set up a trust fund for Tommy when he was born. They committed to investing $1,000 each month until he became 18. There should have been more than $100,000 in the trust. We discovered records that demonstrated they had been moving all of the funds to Sarah's children's accounts. James continued searching through our documents and discovered further proof of their dishonesty. My parents were retired and on fixed incomes, so each time we filed for financial aid for Tommy's medical bills, they wrote letters to the hospital stating that they were unable to assist. However, their bank records reveal that they were simultaneously sending Sarah sizable sums. I was contacted over LinkedIn by my dad's secretary. According to her, my dad had been assisting Sarah with corporate funds, classifying the transfers as business costs. In order to demonstrate that Sarah was a business consultant for his insurance company, he fabricated paperwork. According to the secretary, he had sent more than $200,000 in business funds to Sarah throughout the previous 3 years. According to my mom's best friend, who also works at the same school, my mom has been embezzling money from the school's fundraising accounts in order to give it to Sarah. She changed the records to hide it. Each year, the school generated funds for the medical emergencies of its students. This fund was overseen by my mother, who also had access to every account. Since I blocked Sarah, she has been attempting to reach me from several phone numbers. She occasionally threatens to sue me for violation of privacy and defamation. At other times, she calls in tears and says that Mark is questioning her about her history and she wants my assistance. She said in her voicemail yesterday that if I didn't stop anyone from looking into her finances, she would tell everyone that I had abused Tommy. Yesterday, my parents issued a letter via their attorney. They said that if I agreed not to sue them, they would create a new trust fund for my future children. To demonstrate their good faith, they promised to contribute $200,000 right away. They also wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement in the letter, which said that I would never speak about Sarah's life or how they helped to sustain her financially. A number of family members have severed all communication with Sarah and my parents. After learning of what transpired, my dad's golfing pals have ceased inviting him to their weekly events. The other members of my mom's book club, who were primarily the parents of her students, no longer wanted to get out with her, so she had to dissolve it. The most challenging aspect is that pictures of Sarah's family traveling to upscale locations while Tommy was ill kept turning up. The same week that we were pleading with my parents to contribute to Tommy's last surgery, someone discovered photos of Sarah's family at Disney World. The matching outfits Sarah's children are wearing in the pictures cost more than what we had to buy to save my son's life. Second update. Our attorney discovered something that clarifies a lot of my parents' actions, particularly their strong preference for Sarah. Sarah is not their biological daughter, as we found out. At the age of 2, she was adopted. They didn't tell anyone, not even Sarah. While our lawyer was looking into the missing trust fund funds, the adoption documents surfaced. Sarah was adopted by my parents following my mother's 4 miscarriages. Because they were concerned that it would impact Sarah's feeling of family, they chose to keep the adoption a secret. Not even our grandparents were informed. In order to avoid being questioned about the unexpected arrival of a 2-year-old, they relocated to a different city immediately following the adoption. The attorney also discovered proof that my parents had assisted Sarah in her scam throughout the years. My parents hired someone $155,000 to fabricate transcripts indicating Sarah graduated with honors after she left college after 2 years. They had a business associate of my dad write fictitious work references for her. Sarah never worked anyplace. All of the jobs she claimed to have had throughout the years were fictitious. In order to obtain credit cards and loans, my parents assisted her in fabricating an identity. They obtained phony papers by using my dad's contacts at the insurance firm. Sarah obtained moreover $300,000 in loans from various banks using this fictitious name. My dad's business provided the funds that my parents used to make the payments. Sarah lost all control when our lawyer informed her about the adoption. She posted all of this on Facebook. She disclosed how my parents assisted her in stealing Emily's fiancé, hiding from her first husband, and concealing her credit card theft. She even acknowledged that she had made false claims regarding the abuse of her first spouse. Sarah shared images of text exchanges that demonstrated how my parents assisted her in fabricating a medical emergency so she could get family members to lend her money. She had a routine. She would choose a financially secure relative, fabricate a narrative about one of her children requiring medical care and have my parents verify her account. In this way, they conned at least 7 different relatives. At last, my parents sobbed and told our lawyer everything. They have supported Sarah and her family with over $500,000 over the last 10 years. They borrowed funds from their retirement accounts, took out second and third mortgages on their home, and my dad even embezzled from the client accounts of his business. I was even more incensed by their response when the lawyer questioned them about why they chose to let Tommy die rather than assist us. They said that if they stopped providing Sarah money, they would be cut off from their grandkids. According to my dad, if the kids ever stopped supporting Sarah's lifestyle, she had threatened to vanish with them. My mother acknowledged that she was aware of Sarah's scheme to take Mark away from Emily. She claimed that Sarah had confided in her that she would stop at nothing to win Mark's affection. Rather than intervening, my mother assisted Sarah in setting up private sessions with Mark. Even the note that Mark left for Emily was written with her assistance. Our lawyer now works with Tom, Sarah's first husband. He has evidence that my parents assisted Sarah in fabricating accusations of domestic abuse against him. To fabricate medical records indicating injuries, they hired a physician. With the aid of these documents, Sarah was able to get restraining orders against Tom, which barred him from visiting his daughter for several years. When my dad's business learned about the stolen funds, an internal investigation was launched. He had been fabricating insurance policies and keeping the premiums, they found out. He used the funds to support Sarah and created policies for non-existent people. He was dismissed by the corporation and is facing criminal prosecution. Concerned about being linked to my dad's scam, a number of his business associates have severed their connections with him. After parents protested that their children were being taught by someone involved in fraud, my mother was forced to leave teaching early. Additionally, the school is looking into the disappearance of dollars from student activities funds. In order to cover their legal expenses, my parents had to sell their home. They could be charged with fraud, embezzlement, and aiding in the creation of fraudulent documents. For making fictitious police reports about her first husband, identity theft, and financial fraud, Sarah is under investigation. Update 3. Over the last 6 months, everything with my family has dramatically changed. In order to settle their legal debts, my parents had to sell their home and the majority of their belongings. They currently reside on the opposite side of town in a little one-bedroom apartment. My dad needs to repay $400,000 that he took from customer accounts after his company won their lawsuit against him. Unfortunately, no insurance firm will hire him, so he is now working as a night security guard. After Mark learned about Sarah's first marriage and all of her falsehoods, her life completely collapsed. Even more information about her past was discovered by the private investigator he hired. Prior to her first marriage, Sarah had another child from a previous relationship. She never mentioned this child to anyone and relinquished her parental rights. The fact that she had left 2 children behind before becoming his wife and father repulsed Mark. Mark obtained full custody of their 3 children after filing for divorce. The judge concurred that Sarah's past of deception and desertion made her an unfit mother. She is not even permitted to visit the kids unattended. Mark and the children returned to their hometown in Texas. He had to obtain a restraining order since Sarah kept creating fresh social media profiles to reach him. Tom, Sarah's first husband, won his appeal for retroactive child support. Sarah was ordered by the court to give him $150,000 plus interest for the years she was missing. They are seizing the meager fortune she received from our grandma last year since she's unemployed. Now 15, Tom's daughter won't talk to Sarah or my parents after finding out that they assisted in keeping her from her father. Because of the stolen fiancé event, my cousin Emily sued Sarah in civil court for mental anguish. Sarah and my parents planned the entire thing months in advance, according to old emails that Emily's lawyer discovered. Because Mark's family was wealthy, they specifically targeted him. Last month, the matter was resolved out of court, but as a condition of the deal, Sarah had to give Emily her beach house. James received an offer of employment in Colorado that had complete medical benefits and higher wages. To start over, we made the decision to relocate. We're keeping it quiet this time, but I'm 4 months pregnant. The only people who are aware of the pregnancy are my Aunt Linda and 2 cousins. We've made the decision to stop communicating with Sarah and my parents. Some family members are still attempting to persuade me to pardon my parents. They claim that my parents have learned their lesson and lost everything. I am constantly getting letters from Uncle Bob about how my parents miss us and cry during family get-togethers. However, I informed him that I don't care about their tears because their decisions caused my son to lose out on his entire life. Last week, Sarah was arrested for attempting to use her children's social security information to apply for new credit cards. She is being charged with identity theft. When she was in jail, she called me to seek assistance with bail money. I banned the phone number of the jail. The only positive outcome of this circumstance is the increased closeness of other family members. In Colorado, my Aunt Linda moved close to us to assist with the impending baby. My cousins have established a group chat where we encourage one another and communicate every day. Without Sarah and my parents, we are starting a new family. Every day I still miss Tommy. We talk about him a lot, and his photos are everywhere in our new home. However, I'm happy that my parents and Sarah's truth was revealed. At least they are no longer able to harm others with their falsehoods. Among all of this, the most difficult lesson I took away was that sometimes the people who ought to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the most. However, right now, my attention is on the future and creating a better life with the family members that genuinely care about us. I departed to start my own business in spite of my parents' opposition. They then tried to take my money and filed a lawsuit against me. I was never liked by my parents. They went to the same college and were infatuated in high school. When my mother found out she was pregnant while still in college, their ambitious intentions to tour the world and see other cultures were dashed. Although they thought about ending the pregnancy, their parents forbade it. My mother eventually left college and moved in with her parents because she was unable to cope with the criticism and rumors from other people. I entered the world in this manner. My grandparents loved me, but my mother hated me. My mother never spent time with me, so for a long time I thought she was my sister and my grandparents were my parents. When I tried to get her attention, she would either yell at me or ignore me. I was unaware of my father's existence because he was not present. During this period, my parents kept dating. I know they didn't want a kid, but I didn't understand why they detested me as a kid. Both of my grandparents were friendly to me, spent time with me, and watched after me. By the time of my father's college graduation, I was beginning to walk and speak. He started coming to see me every weekend because he felt bad about not being more active in my life. I assumed he was merely my grandparents' buddy. My grandparents urged him to get to know me, but my mother detested it when he spent time with me and insisted that he ignore me. That's how I found out he was my dad. He moved in with my mother after proposing to her when he acquired a job. My mother was fiercely opposed to my father's desire for me to live with them so they could care for me. As they became older, my grandparents wanted my parents to assume the role. I moved in with my parents when I was 5 years old after they reluctantly took me in. It would be an understatement to say that I detested living with my parents. It seemed as though darkness had taken the place of the light in my existence. My mother threatened to expel me if I did anything wrong and was always reminding me to be thankful that I was still living with them. My dad arrived home late at night after working all day. He insisted that I go to bed since he couldn't handle me that day and that he needed time alone whenever I wanted to spend time with him. My grandparents used to love me, but now I live with parents who hate me. I knew I wasn't wanted, but I didn't know why. Unlike other children, I never received toys or treats from my parents. On occasion, I would arrive at school with unfinished assignments, and my instructor would call my mother to yell at me for being indolent and to accept responsibility. Because I was so afraid of her, I began to meticulously complete my assignments in the hopes that one day she would accept me. However, she never did. My father continued to live in his own universe, unconcerned with my everyday activities or academic achievement. As I became older, I realized the true feelings my parents had for me. I observed that they regarded me differently than other children. I observed other parents embracing, kissing and grinning as they dropped off their kids. None of that ever happened to me. I had the impression that I was living with strangers. I began to wonder if I was actually their biological child as a result. I asked my grandparents every time I went to see them and they confirmed that I was their child. They clarified that my parents simply required more time to grow up. My mother, on the other hand, never sat down to say anything nasty. If I were in high school with you, I would have bullied you mercilessly. It was strange to hear my mother make fun of my hair, glasses and weight. My mother refused to acknowledge that I had a milk allergy, even though my grandparents were well aware of it. She made me drink milk one day, saying that children in her era didn't have allergies and that I was pretending to have one to be cool. I ended up in the hospital as a result of a serious allergic reaction. She was shaken by the situation, particularly when the police arrived to speak with her. She never gave me milk again after that. She sobbed when my dad yelled at her as well. My recuperation was filled with conversation as my grandparents hurried to the hospital to be with me. My parents' attitude toward me changed after this episode. In the evenings, my dad would spend time with me and put me to bed, and my mother began getting me up for school and helping me get ready. They started treating me like a human being. I'm not sure what happened. Seeing my dad invite me to watch football games with him or my mom inquire about school was odd but enjoyable. I started to know my parents better in this way. Since I didn't harbor any animosity toward them, I believe I was born with a great deal of empathy. One of my favorite memories of the three of us is going to the beach on the weekends. My parents began to show me some love and I stopped feeling envious of the children in my class. My mom's mother, my grandma, taught me how to crochet, and when I became 15, I realized I had a knack for it. By this point, my grandfather was dead, and my grandma made a few $100s a year selling her lovely handmade crocheted items at the local craft market. I was captivated by the elaborate designs and vivid hues she employed, and I eagerly took in every aspect of her work. I developed a strong desire for making one-of-a-kind and customized goods as I spent more time developing my crocheting abilities under her tutelage. I made the decision to attempt selling my own crocheted goods after being inspired by my grandmother's attitude of entrepreneurship. At the same neighborhood craft market where she displayed her artwork, I set up a tiny stand with her encouragement. The enormous amount of feedback made me understand that I could make money from my interest. As soon as the word got out about my talent, students, acquaintances, and even locals began placing special orders. Customers were intrigued to the idea of owning something handmade and one of a kind, and each piece I created conveyed a story. My abilities and inventiveness expanded along with my modest business. In order to stretch the limits of conventional crochet, I started experimenting with other yarn textures, colors, and patterns. From basic blankets and scarves to elaborate wearables and home decor pieces, my creations have grown throughout time. My resolve to further hone my skill was strengthened by the encouraging comments and recurring business. My grandma advised me to open a savings account in order to better manage my money when I began to make a sizable income. She suggested that I put my salary aside for college. My parents were shocked to learn how much I had been making. And their eyes widened when I told them. They considered crocheting to be a pointless pastime till that point. They really objected when they saw that I was earning a substantial sum of money for my age. My mother forbade me from going to my grandmother's house, and my father threatened to burn all of my crocheted items, claiming he wasn't working hard to pay for my school so I could waste time on stupid things. When I told them that the money I had earned was with my grandma, they called her and began to shout at me. Despite my parents' insistence that they should have every penny, my grandma refused to give them anything when she discovered they were attempting to steal my money. This helped me realize that my parents were still as self-centered and self-serving as ever, despite the passage of time. I was determined not to lose the money that might be used to pay for my college education, and I couldn't give up my love of crocheting. My parents' actions made me question whether they would even pay for my college education, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I made a plan to spend every weekend working on my designs at my grandmother's house. My best buddy, who was aware of the situation and encouraged me, was the one I lied to when I told my parents that I was staying at their house. We collaborated to complete the pouring orders from customers at my grandmother's residence. My grandmother was essential to the development of my company. In order to reach a wider audience, I also embraced online channels like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Social media has become an effective tool for interacting with other artists and exhibiting my work. The digital world gave me countless opportunities to share my enthusiasm with people throughout the world. My little stand at the neighborhood craft show grew into a successful internet business over time. As a co-owner, my grandmother assisted me in opening a bank account with her. I had entire faith in her, and because of her, I was able to put all of my money aside for college. When my own parents merely wanted to keep my money for themselves, she had faith in me. My mother once looked through my phone without my knowledge and found out that I had an internet company. We got into a heated argument once she discovered that I was still running it behind their backs. My grandmother and I were both yelled at by my parents. They claimed to have raised and taken care of me all my life, and demanded that I take all of the money I had made and give it to them. I almost cried as I tried to clarify that I wasn't hurting anyone and that the money was for my college. My father shouted that he could no longer trust me since I had cheated on them. Standing behind me, my mother insisted that I remove my Instagram page. Instead, I shrewdly canceled my account, intending to restart it after I was no longer under parental control. Then, starting at 9 a.m., they imposed stringent phone limitations. Until 4 p.m. and 12 a.m. until 8 in the morning. Additionally, they began following my whereabouts and looking through my online history, sending me alerts if I looked up anything they thought was inappropriate. Even harmless things like buying underwear. My parents would phone me and my friends several times if I didn't return home right away after going out with them, something I was only permitted to do twice a week. They forbade me from crocheting with my grandmother, although occasionally I was permitted to spend a few hours with her after school. They threatened to disconnect my phone and internet if I didn't comply. Even though I was just 16 and had no means of escape, there were plenty of days when I just wanted to flee. My parents agreed to let me work part-time at a nearby cafe in exchange for a quarter of my profits. Without protest, I gave them their weekly allotment and sent my grandmother the remaining 75% to be deposited into my bank account. My parents persisted in making my life miserable by frequently entering my room at strange hours to check on me, reading through my emails and chats, and keeping tabs on where I was. I was grounded or made to give them a larger portion of my wages if I disobeyed their regulations. Knowing that getting into a reputable college was my ticket to leaving this existence behind, I concentrated on doing well in school in spite of everything. I put in a lot of work. I packed everything I had purchased for myself the night before my 17th birthday, leaving behind things my parents had given me, like my phone. To be sure they couldn't follow me or discover any details about my plans, I cleared my phone. I was finally able to move in with my grandmother when she came to take me up early in the morning. When my parents saw me go, they became irate and began fighting with my grandmother, threatening to call the police. Since I was now 17 and could make my own decisions, I told them to go ahead. They threatened to tell everyone that I was an unappreciative daughter in an attempt to blackmail me, but I didn't care. Additionally, they threatened to stop providing any financial aid for college, but I grinned since I knew I had saved enough money to qualify for a scholarship. I experienced a mixture of anxiety, relief, and resolve as I left the house. I had no idea that my path would soon take a surprising detour. It was refreshing to spend the first few weeks at my grandmother's house. Finally, the severe limitations were removed, and I was free to breathe without continual observation. I started by purchasing a new phone and obtaining a new number. After that, my grandmother and I went to the bank to change my minor account to an individual one. Being able to use my own card and account without anyone's consent made me very happy. I started crocheting again, therefore I revived my Instagram account. My grandmother was really encouraging and even offered me a tiny room in her home where I could erect a temporary studio. A week after I moved out, I received word from neighbors and family that my parents had celebrated their newfound freedom with a party. Being able to begin their new family life, without the burden of my presence, made them very pleased. They shared a ton of photos of themselves laughing and drinking all night long, and they invited their pals who didn't have kids. At first the news was painful. Just 1 week after I left, my parents were celebrating my disappearance, which served as a clear reminder of how unwelcome I had been in their lives. When they learned about the event, my dad's parents were equally taken aback. They contacted right away to find out what had happened after they had my new number from one of my cousins. I was honest with them about my connection with my parents and the reasons behind my departure. When they heard about the abuse, they were appalled and questioned why I hadn't contacted them for assistance. I described how my grandparents and a select group of pals were the only people I could communicate with due to parental restrictions. At this point, my dad's parents disclosed that my parents had never desired me at all. After I moved in with them, they believed my parents had changed, but they were mistaken. They pleaded with me to pardon them for their lack of support. In order to defend me, they also talked to my grandmother, who told them about the numerous arguments she had with my parents. Following this, my dad's parents decided to tell everyone in the family about what my parents had done. As word got out among family members and acquaintances, individuals began contacting one another to offer their support. I was taken aback by their empathy for my situation. Some even offered financial assistance, but I turned them down and asked them to promote my crocheting business instead. This is how my company started to expand. I received full scholarship acceptance to my ideal college around this time. Finally, a positive change in my life was on the horizon. My grandma lived close to the college, so I could go see her every weekend to crochet or spend time with her. My dad's parents chose to give me their old vehicle as a gift. I was able to see my grandmother more easily because it only required minor repairs. A friend of mine who was employed at a local newspaper contacted me to inquire about writing a piece about me. Since there weren't many young company owners in our community, she believed that my narrative might encourage other young people to pursue their own goals. I gave it some thought and accepted the interview. I hoped that if a child out there was trapped in a toxic atmosphere like I had been, they might read my tale and be inspired, but I didn't think it was a huge thing because I still had a lot of work to do on my business. It seemed odd to see my journey highlighted in the paper when the piece was published. Even though it was only a minor accomplishment, I felt proud of the effort I had put into my business in spite of all the challenges for the first time in a very long time. Other family members and friends began to contact me to congratulate me on my accomplishment, and my grandmother was quite proud of me. For me, this was a novel sensation. My parents never encouraged or acknowledged my diligence when I was growing up. My parents called my grandmother and yelled at her after reading the account. They demanded that I publicly give them credit for my business and accused me of betraying them by going behind their back. They had begun to receive criticism from relatives for their domineering actions. Additionally, they threatened to sue me and demanded that I give them a portion of my revenues. I started the business under my grandmother's roof, she told them forcefully, and she challenged them to try to take me to court, which they would undoubtedly lose. I wanted to yell at my parents because I was so upset over their actions, but I knew I couldn't. Instead, I invited my close friends and family to a little celebration that I had planned. Before I left for college, it was an opportunity to celebrate my business and hard work with people who truly loved me, a time I thought I earned. We had an amazing time. Naturally, My folks heard about it and managed to obtain my new phone number. They began emailing me, saying they wished they had never had me and labeling me an ungrateful daughter. My dad even sent me a lengthy text saying that I was squandering money celebrating with other people while he had spent his entire life supporting me. When my parents celebrated after I moved out, was it inappropriate of me to have a party to celebrate with my loved ones? Update 1. I had no idea my tale would become viral when I uploaded it to Reddit. I noticed that my narrative was making the rounds on TikTok in a matter of days. I'm afraid my parents might learn about this. Please pray they don't for me. Many of you have recommended that I permanently block my parents, and I intend to do just that. To let them know how their actions have impacted me, I would like to write them one last email. Despite what some of you have said, I am not a doormat. Since I'm still a young person and my parents are really toxic, it's challenging to cut them off entirely. No one prepares you for what to do when you have toxic parents and need to break off relationships with them, despite society's insistence that parents always want the best for us. I know some of you think I'm to fault for allowing my parents to take advantage of me, but keep in mind that I'm still a young person learning how to advocate for myself. Update 2. We appreciate everyone who got in touch with encouraging words and shared similar experiences. As I previously stated, with my grandmother's assistance, I composed an email to my parents. The email's contents are as follows. Dear parents, I've given our relationship a lot of thought, considering its past, present, and possible future. I regretfully recognize that, in order to further my personal development and well-being, I must cut off any contact with you too. I longed for your love during my early years and tried my hardest to live up to your standards, but I was never good enough. I have made several attempts over the years to gain acceptance in your life and to understand why you seem to despise me, but I have never been accepted. From my first recollections, when Mom made me drink milk in spite of my allergies, to feeling alienated in my own house, your behavior influenced how poisonous our family is. Nevertheless, I continued to aspire for a connection that never materialized. With Grandma's help, I discovered a sense of purpose and comfort in crocheting, which I believed could help us connect. But as I developed my company, your attempts to manipulate and discredit me have just strengthened my resolve to leave this poisonous atmosphere. Your attempts to control my festivities, threaten legal action, and insist on taking a piece of my hard-earned money just serve to further expose how toxic you are to me. I want you to know that this choice is not meant to be hurtful or retaliatory. It is a manifestation of self-preservation, a start toward creating a life devoid of poison and full of the affection and assistance that each and every child is entitled to. I don't mean any disrespect to any of you, but I must put my mental and emotional health first. I appreciate you encouraging me to be self-sufficient and undervaluing my abilities. I hope you both find happiness without me and wish you luck in your future pursuits. I ask that you honor my choice to stop communicating. Let's have a friendly separation. I'll admit that while I was composing this email to my parents, I started crying. It's really difficult to cut off your parents, even though I know I should be tough and keep in mind all the horrible things they have done to me. We are conditioned to adore them as children, and it might be challenging to overcome that mentality. I blacklisted them everywhere after I sent the email. I'm going to college in a few days and I'm a little anxious about it. My dad's parents and my grandmother will assist me in relocating to my new dorm. Meeting new people and forming friendships excites me. To everyone inquiring, even if I'm a college student, I won't give up on my successful crocheting business. My passion is creating original designs. I'll put in a lot of effort to balance it with my studies. As of right now, this is the only update I have. Update 3. My previous update was 6 months ago. Whoa. I'm amazed at how much time has gone by and how my life has changed. Above all, I am doing really well in college. Even though the classes are difficult, I'm working hard to keep my GPA high. Even though my crocheting business is doing well, I am aware that a college degree will serve as a safety net. In college, I've also made some amazing friends, and I even receive more crochet orders as a result of them. I've been able to meet new individuals and discover new vistas thanks to college. Compared to the loneliness I experienced at home, this is a welcome change. I even currently date a man named Kyle. We have only been dating for 2 months and we are still getting to know one another. We'll see how things work out because he's a nice man. I make it a point to go see my grandmother every weekend. We are still working from her temporary workspace to complete our crochet orders. The company is flourishing, and our clients' enthusiastic feedback is tremendous. Following my passion has given me a sense of fulfillment and purpose in addition to financial stability. It's been a quiet 6 months since my sincere email to my folks. They haven't tried to get in touch with me. According to my grandparents, My parents sold everything and left the nation in search of a new beginning since they felt that everyone was criticizing them. I have no idea where they are, and to be honest, I don't give a damn. It says volumes that they decided to go without making an effort to make amends or even offering an apology. Wherever they have gone, I sincerely hope they find happiness and are able to follow their lifelong dreams. It's time for me to concentrate on my personal path and on creating the life I've always desired. I would like to thank everyone who has been following my story and providing supportive comments. I am so grateful for your support. If all of this has taught me anything, it's how important it is to surround yourself with positive, self-affirming people. I am where I am now because of my grandmother and others who had faith in me. Most likely, this will be my final update. Thanks to everybody. My sister got my wife fired, but karma struck when her $2.5 million fraud scheme was exposed, leading to her downfall. Thelma, 35F, my sister, who is 32M, has always been fiercely competitive with everyone, particularly when it comes to professional accomplishments. Since she was a straight-A student who was accepted into a prominent college and immediately after graduation found a distinguished career, Thelma was always our parents' golden child. Thelma never forgot that I was a more typical student who took a few years to figure out what I wanted to do. Being the successful member of our family has become Thelma's entire identity. She is a senior manager at one of the leading IT businesses in our city. Her accomplishments are continuously praised by our parents, who also use her as an example for the rest of us to follow. She lives in a fancy home in the greatest area of town and earns a very decent living. Every family get-together becomes an opportunity to highlight her most recent bonus or promotion. 3 years ago, while both of us were speaking at a tech conference, I met my wife, Libby, 30F. Libby had the most amazing work ethic I had ever seen, and she was intelligent and motivated. She was from a very different family than ours. When she was 6 years old, her parents left Vietnam and took on several professions to support themselves. While maintaining stellar marks and eventually receiving her degree in computer technology, Libby had to work during high school and college to support her family. The thing that truly appealed to me about Libby was her humility in spite of her success. She never disparaged others or boasted about her achievements. Rather, she was constantly attempting to guide younger developers and make others successful. We bonded right away since we both enjoy coding and solving problems, and last year, after 2 years of dating, we were married in a modest ceremony. Thelma had never been fond of Libby. I initially assumed it was simply her customary aloofness toward strangers, but it soon became apparent that Thelma viewed Libby as a danger. Thelma would frequently make subtle jabs about how Libby was squandering her skills at a smaller company, despite the fact that she was leading the engineering department at her startup and producing creative work. That's cute, but at a real tech company like mine, or you should apply for a junior position at my company if you want to do actual important work, were some of the remarks she would make to break up Libby's employment stories. Our parents never mentioned Thelma's actions, and when I attempted to confront her about it, they blamed me of being overly sensitive and said that Thelma was only attempting to support Libby in her professional endeavors. Libby never took the bait or got into a fight with Thelma, and she always responded to her remarks with elegance. To Thelma's seeming annoyance, she would simply smile and shift the topic. When Libby received an amazing job offer from the same business where Thelma works, but in a different department, 6 months ago everything truly came to a head. Better income, more responsibility, and the opportunity to oversee significant initiatives that could significantly impact the industry made it Libby's ideal position. She would be in charge of financial technology integration across several divisions, which was Libby's area of expertise at her firm. Thelma usually dominated the conversation. So when we broke the news to her during a family dinner, she became extremely silent. Our parents were ecstatic, discussing how the sisters-in-law could get together for lunch and how wonderful it would be to have both of their daughters working for the same esteemed organization. Thelma merely shoved food around her plate and said something ambiguous about how hiring practices must be evolving. Libby was doing well when she started the job. She was already making strides toward simplifying some of their antiquated systems, and her team adored her. Every day, she would return home with excitement, sharing with me the difficulties she was facing and the advancements she was making. She was happier than I had ever seen her in her career. After only 2 weeks in her new position, Libby was abruptly called into HR and immediately let go. They said they had found that Libby had misrepresented her prior projects and employment experience on her resume. Libby was caught off guard. In her life, she had never told a lie. It didn't make sense because they had called all of her references and confirmed her prior job during the lengthy interview process. Libby was heartbroken. When she came home, she sobbed for hours, claiming she didn't comprehend what had transpired. HR refused to even look at her copies of all project material and employment records. Like criminals, They simply escorted her out of the building. I began looking into it since something didn't make sense. I requested a friend of mine who worked in IT at the company to investigate the situation because he owed me a favor. I was furious at what he found. Thelma had brought fake proof that Libby had forged some of her employment history to HR. In order to give the impression that Libby had misrepresented her position and accomplishments at her former employer, she had really produced fictitious emails and supporting paperwork. Thelma made no attempt to refute it when I challenged her about it. She stated that someone with Libby's past didn't belong at a prestigious company like theirs and that she was defending the company's brand. She blasted Libby for not being our kind of people, and expressed her frustration at seeing underqualified diversity candidates occupying unworthy positions. My sister's candid discussion of her preconceptions was something I had never heard her do before, and it sickened me. I expected our parents to be as appalled as I was when I told them everything. They said that rather than making a huge deal out of it, we should deal with it within the family. They stated that Thelma most likely didn't mean any damage and was simply anxious about her job. They advised Libby to simply look for new employment and move on, stating that there were many other organizations that would be better suited for someone with her experience. Karma caught up to Thelma last week. Her own supervisor found out that she had been fabricating reports to exaggerate the performance of her team. She was promptly fired. Now that she needs money to pay her mortgage and other payments until she gets a new job, she is frantically texting and calling me. It seems that she has already spent all of her savings on her opulent lifestyle. Our parents are placing a lot of pressure on me to do the right thing and help Thelma maintain her house because they believe that family comes first and that she's still your sister. They keep stressing that Thelma made a mistake but that she is family, while Libby is just an in-law. I declined. Just as she left Libby alone after purposefully ruining her career, I told Thelma she was on her own. Thelma broke down in tears and apologized profusely, claiming that I'd been cruel and that she had made a mistake. However, I don't think she genuinely feels regret for what she did to Libby. She merely apologizes for needing assistance after being exposed for her own deceptions. Even though my sister might lose her house, am I the jerk for not helping her? Although it's not as good as the job she lost, Libby has since obtained another one. However, I'm still upset over Thelma's actions. I don't think I can ever forgive someone who intentionally wounded my wife because of their own prejudices and anxieties, despite our parents' constant insistence that I'm being too harsh and that I need to forgive my family. Update. Since my last post, things have become a lot messier. Thelma decided to start what I can only characterize as a smear campaign against Libby across our entire extended family after I declined to assist her with her financial issues. She seems to be attempting to change the past such that she is the victim in this whole situation. Thelma brought a wholly made-up account of what happened to our extended family. In fact, she claimed that it was Libby who had been deceitful and manipulative. She falsely claimed that Libby had applied to her department on purpose, it was a whole other division, and had started attempting to appropriate Thelma's projects and claim credit for her work right away. Thelma stated that she had to notify HR of Libby's access to private documents pertaining to her team's projects in order to safeguard both the business and herself. She presented Libby as a corporate spy who had married me in order to gain access to Thelma's position inside the corporation. She even implied that, knowing that I was Thelma's brother, Libby had singled me out at the tech conference 3 years prior. In actuality, Libby was unaware of Thelma's existence until after we had been dating for a few months. The majority of our extended family seemed to be fully believing Thelma's falsehoods, which is the saddest part. Once a huge fan of Libby and a constant praise of her cuisine, our Aunt Linda now refuses to even look at her. Uncle Bob, who works in tech recruiting, even called me to warn me about how Libby might be using me to go up the corporate ladder. Our cousins have been making ambiguous remarks on social media about snakes in the family and gold diggers who destroy families. They have been phoning and emailing me nonstop, accusing me of betraying my own people for an outsider who attempted to destroy my sister's career. They don't seem to care that Thelma was fired for her own dishonesty. They have concluded that Libby must have planned that as retaliation as well. It's truly amazing the mental acrobatics they're employing to paint Thelma as the victim in all of this. My parents, who before at least seemed to be impartial, are now completely on Thelma's side. In fact, my mother had the audacity to tell me that she should have seen Libby was troubled from the moment she met her. Along with other blatantly racist remarks that sickened me, she said things like, people from her background often have different values about honesty. Go back to her own community where she wouldn't cause problems for our family, my dad advised Libby. Our youngest sister, Amy, 28F, is the only one who has defended Libby, and her revelation has altered my entire understanding of Thelma. At last, Amy broke down and shared with us a story that occurred 5 years ago. Shortly after graduating, she had applied for a junior job at Thelma's company. She aced every interview and had outstanding credentials. Her application was abruptly denied because of character issues, even though the team wanted to recruit her. Amy learned that Thelma had also gone to HR at the time with unfounded claims that Amy had cheated in college. It seems that Thelma had fabricated emails from Amy's college to bolster her allegations. Thelma had threatened to use her connections to blacklist Amy in the industry if she ever told anyone, so even though Amy was distraught, she kept silent about it. Amy was so disturbed by the incident that she ultimately accepted a job in a totally other industry. Thelma lost all control when Amy told her account in our family group chat and included screenshots of Thelma's threatening communications from that time. At 11 p.m., she stormed into Amy's flat, banging on the door and yelling that Amy was a traitor who was attempting to ruin her life. Amy claims she had no idea what secrets Thelma was referring to, but she was threatening to reveal all of her secrets. Additionally, Thelma promised to ensure Amy never again worked in the city. Amy had to call the police to get Thelma off the property because she was so scared. It's terrifying to hear my sister sound so insane after she captured a portion of Thelma's breakdown on her phone. Thelma was even more incensed after the cops warned her about harassment. Our family is now utterly divided. Our parents continue to support Thelma, claiming that Amy must have misinterpreted what transpired 5 years ago and that she is merely envious of Thelma's accomplishments. In an attempt to portray Amy and I as permanently jealous troublemakers, who are just out to harm poor, successful Thelma, they are accusing us of being disloyal and ungrateful for banding together against our sister when she is already down. They have even begun bringing up all of our childhood transgressions. I've begun compiling all of the proof of Thelma's behavior, including the police report from her breakdown, the testimonies from coworkers who saw her behavior, the phony emails she made about Libby, and the threatening text she sent to Amy. After reviewing everything, the legal staff at Libby's new workplace believes we have a solid case against Thelma and her old employer for defamation and wrongful termination. However, my parents are now threatening to disown Amy and me if we destroy our sister's life over a misunderstanding. They claim that if we don't drop everything and help Thelma get back on her feet, they will write us both out of their will and that pursuing legal action would demonstrate that we were never truly family. Since she doesn't feel safe in her own apartment, Amy is currently staying with us. Despite her own trauma from everything that has transpired, Libby has been a tremendous support system for her. Even though I'm more convinced than ever that confronting Thelma is the right thing to do, it still hurts to see my family fall apart like this. Numerous unpleasant facts about my family have come to light as a result of the entire scenario, which I suppose I always knew existed but never wanted to confront. I used to believe that Thelma's will to excel and her competitive nature were simply acts of ambition, but now I realize that they are a much more sinister and damaging trait. Update. Everything we believed to be true about Thelma's behavior has been totally disproved. Rachel, a former coworker of Thelma's, contacted Libby via LinkedIn last week. We were all surprised by what Rachel, Thelma's assistant manager for the previous 2 years, disclosed. Although it was undoubtedly a contributing factor, Rachel claims that Thelma's sabotage of Libby was motivated by more than just professional jealousy or prejudice. The true cause was much darker. Libby's new position would have provided her direct access to financial records and system logs, which may have revealed Thelma's years of falsifying the books, despite her best efforts to conceal her own illegal acts at the company. Documentation from Rachel demonstrated that since Thelma was promoted to senior manager, she had been routinely manipulating the performance metrics for her department. To make it appear as though her team was earning millions of dollars in fictitious revenue, she had set up shell businesses, faked contracts, and created phony client accounts. For years, she had been using these fictitious accounts to embezzle company revenue, taking a portion of the phony contracts and transferring it to her personal offshore accounts. Thelma went into a frenzy when Libby started working for the company and was given the responsibility of auditing and integrating all of the financial technology systems. Given her reputation for being meticulous and her experience with system integration, Libby would have unavoidably found out about Thelma's department's anomalies. Thelma fabricated the CV fraud narrative just 2 weeks into Libby's job, which is why she acted so swiftly to fire her. In reality, Rachel had been compiling proof of Thelma's deception for months, but because of Thelma's industry ties, she had been too afraid to come out. Rachel ultimately made the decision to take action after witnessing how Thelma had ruined Libby's career in order to defend herself. She had amassed records of strange money transfers, screenshots of phony client accounts, and copies of false contracts that all pointed directly to Thelma. We gave the police and the company's internal inquiry team all of this material. Thelma had embezzled more than $2.5 million in the previous 3 years, according to the probe. Her activities constituted securities fraud since the fictitious performance figures she disclosed had also affected the company's stock prices. However, the most heartbreaking discovery concerned our parents. When the detectives began tracking down the funds, they found that sizable sums had been going into accounts that belonged to our parents. They eventually acknowledged that they had been aware of Thelma's fraudulent conduct over the previous year after being presented with this evidence. Not only did they know, but they had been actively assisting her in concealing the funds. They had established offshore accounts and produced a paper trail that made the stolen money appear to be genuine investments by using their legal connections. They asserted that since Thelma was the one who stole the money, they had not technically committed any crimes and were only defending their daughter. I was disgusted by their attitude when I questioned them about their involvement in all of this. They said that because Libby claims to care so much about family, she should understand their actions. They even attempted to claim that Libby's assistance in paying her parents' tuition expenses was equivalent to helping Thelma steal millions of dollars. They didn't seem to see the difference between assisting to cover up enormous fraud and working honest jobs to support your family. Their attitude was the worst. They were just sorry they were found, not sorry for what they had done. In fact, according to my mother, none of this would have surfaced if Libby had been more understanding about her place and had discreetly departed the company when Thelma requested it. They continue to blame Libby for everything, claiming that her rigid job choices pushed them to take extreme steps. The involvement of our parents has upset Amy. She had always believed that our parents were simply too forgiving of Thelma and that she was the only toxic member of the family. Amy's entire opinion of our family has been completely destroyed by learning that they were complicit in her misdeeds. She can hardly sleep and has been experiencing anxiety episodes. Thelma is currently facing criminal charges from the firm for fraud and embezzlement. In addition, they are looking into a number of her close co-workers who may have participated in the plot. Although our parents are being investigated for their part in concealing the stolen funds, they have not yet been charged. Thelma is no longer there at all. She stopped answering all messages and cleaned out her home in the middle of the night. My parents say they don't know where Thelma might have gone, but the police are searching for her. I don't believe them at all, considering how they've previously assisted her. Third update. Our family has experienced pain as well as justice in this story's last chapter. 2 weeks ago, Thelma was apprehended for attempting to enter Canada using forged documents. Our parents, as we thought, had assisted her in hiding in several places during her attempt to escape the country. In order to escape a longer term, she ultimately accepted a plea bargain. In addition to 3 years of supervised release, she will spend 2 years in federal prison for embezzlement and securities fraud. Thelma's scam was far more extensive than we first believed, according to the company's inquiry. Since she was initially promoted to management 6 years ago, she had been stealing money and falsifying statistics. In order to hide her tracks, she had also been blackmailing a number of lower-level staff members, threatening to destroy their careers in the same way that she had done to Amy and Libby. All of this has been made possible by the tremendous assistance of Libby's new employer. Following the public revelation of Thelma's transgressions, Libby received a formal apology from her previous employer along with an offer to resume her job. They have given her a sizable payout for wrongful termination in addition to returning her to her previous position with a promotion and full back pay. More significantly, they are putting new rules into place to stop discrimination against workers from immigrant backgrounds and HR fraud. Our parents are dealing with the fallout on their own. Their cooperation with investigators helped them avoid criminal charges, but their role in Thelma's crimes is now well known in our town. Since the partners didn't want to run the risk of their reputation being damaged by association, they were compelled to leave their legal practice. They no longer hold the same position in all of the social circles they once controlled, and the majority of their pals have turned away. Rather than expressing regret, they have intensified their efforts to place the blame on others. Before Thelma was sentenced, they even attempted to write a letter to the judge accusing Libby of manipulating circumstances to accuse Thelma out of jealousy. Given the strong proof of Thelma's culpability, the judge was not impressed. Additionally, they attempted to accuse Amy and I of plotting with Libby to embezzle Thelma's money and blame her, but this desperate attempt clearly failed. Amy has begun to put her life back together. While she searches for a new job away from our parents' influence, she has temporarily moved in with us. The business has also extended an offer to her, admitting that Thelma's bogus accusations were the reason behind her dismissal 5 years prior. After years of Thelma's manipulation and our parents' toxic behavior, she is finally receiving therapy. Her gradual recovery of confidence and realization that none of this was her fault is truly remarkable. Libby and I have stopped communicating with my parents and Thelma altogether. Our lawyer has made it plain that any attempt to get in touch with us will be viewed as harassment, and we have blocked them everywhere. Building our own family with individuals who share our values of integrity and support for one another is our main goal. After seeing all the proof, a number of our cousins who at first thought Thelma was lying have apologized, and we're carefully mending our ties with those who appear to be truly sorry. Some family members continue to maintain that we ought to have kept matters within the family and protected Thelma. Last week, my aunt called and said that we are bad people for allowing Thelma to go to prison and that real families stick together no matter what. However, Thelma's total lack of regret, even in court, has only served to reinforce our decision. She merely expressed regret for trusting the wrong people, specifically Amy and Libby, to reveal her wrongdoings. We have learned from this entire experience that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you are born into. Instead of the poisonous allegiance and corruption that Thelma and our parents attempted to impose on us, Libby, Amy and I are forging a new sort of family founded on integrity, respect and genuine support. My parents made me the other kid, while my sister became their golden child and destroyed my life. I can't make my update without it, so I'm reposting it. Except for this caption, nothing has changed. It's just as it was before the moderators of the entitled parents took it down. After reading a similar experience online, I felt compelled to share my own. I'm publishing this as my one and only Reddit post since I felt that sharing it might make me feel a little better. I've had some counseling, and discussing this topic in particular was quite beneficial. Why not just share it online as well, I reasoned. This year, I turned 18, and I recently moved out on my own, away from my parents. My sister is roughly 10 years my junior. She almost didn't make it to term because her pregnancy wasn't intended. Since I was never given much information, I don't know many specifics about how difficult my mother's second pregnancy was, but I do know that it was extremely taxing on her body, as my sister's birth prevented her from having any more children. That year, she spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. My mother also nearly died during the birth. Because my younger sister might not have been born, it caused her and my father to get attached to her. With the exception of times when they needed a free babysitter, I felt like the other kid in the house ever since. My parents' long-term favoritism has led me to believe that they were truly insane for failing to recognize the precise harm it was causing to me. And now, starting with my 11th birthday, I'll describe how it's rebounding on them. My sister was 2 years old when she wept upon seeing a birthday cake that wasn't hers, therefore my parents asked me to let her blow out my candles. My parents had me do it even though I didn't want to. The moment felt totally wrecked, but they relit the candles so I could do it again later. The following year, the year after that, and so on, all experienced the same thing. They simply persisted in enforcing it until it was standard. My birthdays also had to include gifts for my sister. Hers never had any on mine. They simply said that I'm a boy and boys don't need to worry about it as much, when I questioned why. I understand that I was a child, but did they truly believe that what I said was wise? Not at all. Every time I had a birthday, my parents would pick a location that my sister preferred above mine. After a while, it seemed more like I had no birthdays while my sister had two. Beyond this, my sister became the center of my parents' entire existence. My sister had to agree with me if I wanted to do something. Otherwise, it was vetoed unless I could complete it by myself. Video games didn't seem to bother me there, until my sister wanted to come in and irritate me, so I learned to just lock myself in my room with them. That's why I locked the door. I was an irate teenager who was sick of being interrupted at any time, so when my parents asked me to take it off, I freaked out. My parents were mad at me for being nude in my own room, and my sister repeatedly ran in when I was naked. They retracted their objection and simply let me keep the lock after I pointed out how ridiculous it was. Because she was being pampered every day, my sister developed a princess complex. I avoided her as much as possible since she was highly demanding. I used every justification I could find to avoid dealing with her, even if it meant making things up, in order to have some alone time. I had more alone time once my parents hired a teenage girl to watch me. After my sister refused to listen to her, the babysitter quit, and my parents attempted to avoid paying her by saying she did a poor job. After the girl enlisted the help of others, my parents ultimately gave her the money she was due. After that, they recruited a second girl to watch the kids on a regular basis, and she stayed. I went out of my way to keep myself occupied with my part-time job whenever I could, but my parents still made it obvious that I was expected to care for my sister on any day I had free time. My sister gave me directions and treated me like her own butler. She would not quit using her ridiculous moniker for me. The mere mention of that moniker gets me furious. She would call our parents and cry if I didn't give her whatever she wanted, and I would then face consequences for mistreating her. This led to a lot of heated disputes between us, and once I refused to give in anymore, my relationship with my parents deteriorated to the point that we hardly spoke to each other for a while. However, they had the audacity to boast to other parents that they were the reason I put in so much effort during my high school graduation. Although they weren't incorrect, the explanation they were considering wasn't the one that actually occurred. I put a lot of effort into waiting to be free. However, my parents pretended to have accomplished a lot. Perhaps they did, prior to the birth of my sister. After that, though, it was all about her. Unless parent-teacher conferences were approaching, they didn't even inquire about my schooling. I received a B and C average when I graduated. Even though the trip was supposed to be for me, my sister always had more fun than I did when my parents took me there after I graduated. However, everything really came to a head in July, when I turned 18. Despite the fact that it was my 18th birthday, it didn't seem to be about me. I fervently hoped that, for once, we would be dining at my favorite restaurant. Instead, they had the celebration at Chuck E. Cheese, a local copycat. It became the go-to location for anything big because it was the only one like it in the area. Kids half my age were having their celebrations all around me. I had nothing to do but eat terrible pizza and play outdated arcade games and claw machines for tickets to insignificantly expensive prizes since I was so bored. My parents then produced a pink cake with white flowers on it when it was time for cake. It was clearly not a boy cake, even though it bore my name. There were only 10 candles, which was worse. In front of my sister, my parents blew out the candles and placed the cake. That's when it happened at last. I suddenly experienced a mental flashback of all the repressed annoyance. I then broke down in tears. I was crying in front of the entire family as an 18-year-old boy. Time appeared to stop because everyone was so shocked. All of the things I had been suppressing for the last 8 years just poured out like word vomit when I woke up. The whole family was able to see it. I went outside to sit beside the family car after I was finished. My parents kept the pink cake covered until it was served, so many relatives followed me to apologize and explain that they were unaware of it. The fact that they were unaware didn't matter, I said. For the past 8 years, Little Miss Sunshine had dominated my life while they all looked on. My celebrations and birthdays were all about her, so I didn't really have any of my own. Then, on the most important birthday of my life, they all expected me to simply nod and smile as usual while they gave my sister a cake that was specifically for her, even though it wasn't her birthday. Some of them began apologizing to me, but they gave explanations, claiming that they simply assumed I was fine with it since my parents had told me so. I informed them that I would never tolerate it. I just pretended to accept it after my parents made me do it every year. I instructed them to glance around as I spread my arms. Did this seem like the location I had in mind for my 18th birthday and graduation celebration? All this time, nobody even made an effort to defend me. My sister had it all, and I was just the other kid. My parents stopped allowing me to invite my friends long ago after they attempted to express their disapproval of my sister blowing out my candles, so I never even got to have them there. Was wanting a year that was about me and not her really that bad? There are 365 days in a year. Instead, because I want my own birthday, I'm treated like the entitled, avaricious brat that I am. I resumed my nasty crying. By then, my mother was sobbing too, so my father rushed outside to scold me for creating such a big spectacle. Everyone in the room now believes they are awful parents because I destroyed my sister's moment. I shouted back at him that he should understand why they are bad parents. The rest of the family surrounded him like a swarm of wolves when I said that. I had never seen anything like it before, but I guess it was better late than never. The majority of the throng rushed back inside with my father to argue with my mother after he was virtually backed up to the restaurant's front entrance. My grandparents stayed with me and expressed regret for spending so much time with their eyes closed. I'm not sure what was said to my parents in the restaurant, but they didn't return for around 30 minutes. They appeared completely defeated when they did. Both of my parents were unable to look me in the eyes, and my mother was still sniffling after sobbing so much. Both of them made clumsy excuses for their actions and promised to have the party somewhere else. However, the crowd didn't find it to be sufficient. My parents emphasized that they would never force me to let my sister blow out my candles again, give her gifts on my birthday, or make it about her in any way. One of my uncles cleared his throat pretty loudly. In addition to apologizing for bringing me a cake that was clearly not intended for me, there was another loud cough. They claimed they believed that at my age, cake was no longer a concern for me. Whoa, that was a terrible thing to say. I lost my temper again and screamed at them that it didn't matter how old I was. For years, they had given my sister my birthday without any justification, and they were aware of it. I informed them that since it was too late, there was no need in having the party again. They had made it quite evident that they didn't care about me. I brought up the fact that they had destroyed 8 years of my life before I reached adulthood. What birthdays with them would I be able to anticipate in the future? My father became upset with me for saying so, but he stopped talking after the whole family yelled at him. My grandfather informed him that I was entirely correct and that the harm could not be reversed. He claimed that ever since my sister was born, My parents were terrible individuals who took advantage of me and treated me like a black sheep. Furthermore, he claimed that they were all terrible because they simply allowed it to occur. He went on to say that I owed my life back, not just an apology. I resisted her attempts to approach me as she sobbed my name and apologized. But my mother broke down once more. She was body blocked from approaching half of the household. I just remarked that I was at my breaking point and turned to go. I was found and brought back by one of my aunts. I was so angry that I couldn't even be happy for any justice after all this time, even though I could hear several family members screaming and swearing at my parents over what had transpired. And throughout all of this, where was my sister? She was still eating cake and tearing apart gifts that were intended for me alone in the restaurant. In case anyone was curious, when I sobbed and left, my parents did offer her some cake. They were later called out on it, even though you would assume it wouldn't be their main concern right now. As everyone else left the party, my grandparents persuaded me to settle down and take a seat in their vintage minivan. When my sister was discovered to be opening my gifts, she pitched a fit. One of those gifts was a brand new smartphone, which she was not permitted to retain, so she hurled it against the wall and destroyed it. A few months prior, on her own birthday, she had received a brand new phone. In the end, I became so angry that I ranted about never wanting to have another birthday party. I was allowed to spend the night at my grandparents' place. I still hadn't spoken to my folks when I got home. My father remained as silent as I did, and my mother simply kept crying because I wouldn't talk to her. My grandparents persuaded me to join them for dinner the next weekend. I was shocked to discover a completely different party waiting for me when we arrived. Almost the whole time, my parents were there, grinning awkwardly and saying, "Don't hate us." A large chocolate cake with 18 candles and even a banner with my name on it was present. Since I didn't actually get to celebrate either this year, they dubbed it my happy belated birthday and graduation party. I had to act like I was delighted. 8 years of partiality cannot be reversed or even somewhat impacted by a one nice party. What happened to my sister? It wasn't all about her like it used to be, so she was sitting at the table with her arms folded and her lip twisted. The family sang me a modified version of Happy Day instead of Happy Birthday. My sister let out an ear-piercing scream as soon as I extinguished the candles. My parents, appearing more distressed than ever, had to take her out quickly and return her later. For the remainder of the celebration, she sulked in silence in her seat. My sister was punished for her actions at the last party by having her smartphone taken away, while I was still given a new one. However, there were other gifts besides the smartphone. My entire family helped out and bought me a car. Even though it was only an old white Volvo, I fell in love with it right away. My grandfather, who had some automotive knowledge, had fixed it himself. My sister was obviously not as delighted as I was. She threw a fit and demanded a car as well, letting out another one of those yells. It took some time for them to return outside after my mother had to take her to the restroom. My father simply returned to his dejected appearance. Their attempt to appear respectable in front of the entire family had been essentially wrecked by my sister. My sister was acting that way because my parents brought her up to be a pampered, entitled princess, according to several family members who also had harsh things to say about them. I immediately began driving the automobile around, but a few days later, my sister damaged it by smashing 2 side windows with a hammer and severely damaging the windshield, rendering the vehicle unusable. She screamed bloody murder as my parents grabbed her and removed the hammer, but they were able to stop her before she could do further harm. She even made an attempt to bite them. My grandfather had worked so hard on that car that everyone, especially my grandparents, was upset with my sister. It was destroyed by my sister's outburst. My sister was so indulged by my grandparents, they acknowledged, that she was unable to process the notion that I could have something that she was not able to. My sister was being raised to be an entitled brat by my parents, who were criticized by a number of other family members for setting her up for failure. They said that because my parents wouldn't enforce their rules and instill respect in her, my sister would have a horrible adult life. She was not unpunished for her acts. My sister was sent to boarding school at the beginning of the new school year after being grounded for the remainder of the summer. My father maintained that it was the only way to begin repairing the harm they had caused, despite my mother's tears. Yes, they admitted their mistakes wholeheartedly. Since no one took their side, it was difficult for them to hide it. At the boarding school, my sister is very miserable. She has been lying nearly non-stop and despises the rules and the outfits. But now that there are cameras everywhere, she can't get away with any of it. She yelled at our parents for placing her in that situation despite their repeated attempts to visit her. I've heard that she might live like this until she turns 18. My car's repairs were covered by my parents. The windshield and windows were replaced by an auto glass firm, and the vehicle now has the same appearance as before. My granddad approached me in August about a job possibility with a friend, but it was 40 minutes away. Unless I liked the lengthy journey, I would have to leave my parents' house. I was all for relocating. It was difficult for me to find my first flat. To get a studio, I had to have my credit card approved, but I was able to do it. Since September, I have been residing here. I don't talk to my parents very much, yet they keep trying to reach me. When we do speak, I always feel uncomfortable and uneasy. According to my grandfather, my parents are attempting to get in touch with me because they are unable to cope with their parental failures. He believes that in order for them to feel better about themselves, they want me to forgive them. However, I will not be forgiving them anytime soon. At last, I'm content and no longer with them. Now they have nothing. Not only do they lack my sister, they also lack me. The cost of my sister's boarding school, in addition to the party they held for me and the repairs they made to my car, forced my parents to work longer hours. All they have left is their job to concentrate on, an empty house, and irate relatives. Although I don't enjoy their suffering, it is ultimately the consequence of their own deeds. Edit. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has given me awards. It holds great significance for me. Despite the fact that my piece was lengthy, I felt a great sense of relief after finishing it. In the comments, I saw some people accusing this post of being phony. I don't hold anything against you. If I were reading this, I would also be quite skeptical. I did, however, live it. That is the reality for some parents. People who had comparable or worse circumstances have even gotten in touch with me. Is it truly so strange that my parents behaved in this manner, given the abundance of horrible parents in the world? I come from a close-knit family where we stick together and do things as a group, so it may sound extreme for the entire family to rush back into the restaurant to confront my dad. At gatherings, it can quickly become the whole group versus one individual. I've witnessed it previously, such as when a cousin who was intoxicated was surrounded and taken away from a gathering to become sober. Although I really dislike collective mentalities, they were helpful in this situation. Words cannot express how ashamed my parents were of what they had done. They were unable to come up with a suitable explanation for their actions without coming across as even worse. They have essentially given up, acknowledging that they have no justification and are making a concerted effort to win my favor. I believe that a large portion of my relatives' assistance was motivated by shame, even though many of you are thanking them for it. With the exception of 2 years during COVID, the majority of them attended those 8 birthdays, but they kept quiet. When my sister blew out my candles, they may have given me a critical look, but they remained silent. Why? My grandfather, the patriarch of the family, is the father of my father. My grandfather can be rather frightening. He will assist you in whatever way he can if you're on his good side. The whole family despises you if you're on his bad side. That's a major factor in my distaste for group mentalities. My grandfather felt embarrassed when he remarked that the whole family was to blame for not supporting me throughout those years. They all contributed to the price of my vehicle. They didn't need to make a significant individual contribution because they had so many relatives. Even the receipt from the time I registered the vehicle in my name is with me. They paid $2,000 for it, plus additional money for tires and parts. My granddad adjusted the fluids and tuned it himself. The interior was thoroughly cleaned by my grandmother. Even though I'm incredibly grateful to each of them, I still wish to keep my distance. To figure things out on my own, I need time. It is likely that I will not see my parents again until Christmas or Thanksgiving. My sister has been likened by some to South Park's Eric Cartman, and it's a fairly accurate comparison. Because my parents gave her a lot of junk food, she is overweight. She despises eating anything nutritious. She once topped mashed potatoes with gummy bears, as I witnessed. I feel sick just thinking about that combination. She also spent a lot of time in the restroom as a result of her bad diet. In order to assist, my parents had to purchase fiber snacks, which I don't believe were inexpensive. My sister always believed she was in charge and is also very bossy. She was always giving me directions, so I would frequently lock myself in my room to avoid her. Because she was so domineering, she lost a lot of friends, but my parents assured her that the youngsters were envious of her uniqueness. When things didn't go her way, my sister would even call herself a princess and have big tantrums. Although I'm aware that she is more than a caricature, her actions definitely remind me of Eric Cartman. I am aware that my sister is also not a moron. She simply doesn't put out any effort and only received a C average in school. She would most likely receive straight A's as a student if she put in the necessary effort. Second edit. It appears that the subreddit has banned me. I'm not sure what I did, perhaps the post was too lengthy. In any case, I am no longer able to respond to comments, but I would want to thank everyone who left encouraging words. Thank you everyone from the bottom of my heart. Update. Here is what has transpired since my parents began celebrating my sister's birthday 8 years ago, for anyone who are curious. It has now been almost a year. I thought I was done here, so I didn't log in for a while. However, one day I decided to check in again and saw a ton of private messages requesting updates. The majority of what I'm going to share with you is based on what my parents and grandparents told me. I'm recounting what I discovered, so don't worry if it seems too bizarre. Yes, I'm doing great, but my parents and younger sister aren't doing so well. My sister made a number of attempts to leave boarding school after I last posted. She tried doing nothing, but it didn't help her. And none of her plots or falsehoods succeeded. She then tried going on a hunger strike, not eating anything until our parents arrived to get her up. My father prevented my mother from jumping into the automobile to save her baby, reminding her that they were to blame for my sister's actions. After fewer than 2 days of her hunger strike, my sister started to seek food in the cafeteria. Snacks and sweets were strictly prohibited at school unless they were nutritious. My parents had received a warning from a pediatrician that unless my sister's nutrition improved, she could develop diabetes in the future and possibly experience stunted growth. Gummy bears on mashed potatoes are out. My sister attempted to bully the other girls at the boarding school, of course, but they didn't put up with her bullshit. She got into a quarrel one day and was attacked by many girls who kicked her until a teacher intervened. My sister was scraped and bruised all over, but she wasn't terribly hurt. She blamed everyone else, of course, and said the other girls should follow her instructions. It should come as no surprise that her peers avoided her. She couldn't understand not getting her way, so she threw a fit. My sister was busted when my mother attempted to sneak junk food to her at the boarding school. My parents got into a heated argument as a result. Although my sister still craves junk food, my mother stopped smuggling it after being caught. My sister eventually turned to self-harm as her schemes became more complex in an attempt to influence her way out of the school. Unbeknownst to her, she stole a knife from the cafeteria and stood on a table, threatening to leave without chocolates. Candy indeed. She broke her left arm, her clavicle, and suffered a concussion when she slid and tumbled off the table during a chaotic time. Even the boarding school didn't want her back at that point. She was admitted to a children's mental health facility after leaving the hospital. She is currently receiving treatment for extreme narcissism, which my parents really encouraged. Unless my parents take her out, she is unable to leave the ward. There, she continues her education and follows a rigorous, healthful diet that she hates. It is personal agony for my sister. My father and I got into yet another heated argument when my mother sought to remove her from the ward. My mother took a bottle off the counter during the dispute and struck him with it, severely slashing his face and shattering his cheekbone. After the police were summoned, my mother was driven away in a police car and my father was brought to the hospital. After that, she spent several months in a mental health facility where she was compelled to face her enabling tendencies and trauma. I don't know the details, but from what I've learned, my mother's behavior is a result of unresolved issues from her own upbringing. My parents are now merely sleeping in different bedrooms, though there has been discussion of a divorce. Regarding myself, I recently turned 19. At a restaurant I enjoy, my grandparents hosted a celebration for me. Although my sister was temporarily permitted to leave the ward for the event, my parents and sister were present. She sat there looking at me like she hoped I would burn, her lip twisted. Because of her forced healthy diet, she had lost weight, but her resentment had not gone away. This time, she didn't scream as I extinguished my candles. Rather, she started sobbing uncontrollably while repeatedly asking why. It was merely another attempt at manipulation. Eventually, she pitched a fit, screaming that there was nothing. No pizza, no presents for her, no prizes. She then began to curse at our parents and made an attempt to leave the restaurant. She was clearly attempting to emulate my actions during my 18th birthday celebration, but it was just another example of her incapacity to acknowledge that not everything is about her. In a twisted manner, she was essentially attempting to replicate what I had done the previous year. I know my sister, even though you might think I'm overanalyzing this. She will take action if she believes it would help her achieve her goals. My grandfather spoke to my parents before they brought my sister home early after apologizing to everyone. My grandmother later provided me with some information. According to my grandfather, my parents had better not give in to my sister's requests or host her own party. He cautioned them that unless they permanently stopped supporting her, this conduct would never stop. After hearing this, my sister recognized that her outbursts were no longer effective. The following morning, she was driven back to the ward after being escorted out of the restaurant while kicking and crying. She is currently there. I'm not sure how long she'll be there. Even though she is only a child, she is the most obstinate person I have ever encountered. Until she reaches her lowest point, I don't think she will change. She's trapped in a situation that doesn't allow her to make demands until then. Not even my parents have attempted to hold me responsible for my sister's behavior during the previous 12 months. They've got to acknowledge that they brought her up to be a narcissist and that I had nothing to do with this. I've discovered that supporting a narcissist is a type of addiction. The only mental disorder my sister has been diagnosed with is narcissism, which she inherited from her upbringing. She has an IQ of about 110, which makes her somewhat smarter than me, but she only works hard when she receives a reward. She was conditioned to think that way, and I think it will take years to change. Regarding myself, I'm succeeding on my own. Although it's difficult, I've had to learn how to manage my finances and take care of myself, but it's still far better than living with my sister and parents. Edit. Someone pointed out that it doesn't make sense for my sister to be in a long-term facility for narcissism alone. It usually wouldn't, I agree. I'm being kept in the dark about any more diagnoses. I can sense that my parents aren't telling me everything, and since I'm not her parent, I can't just question the doctors. Nevertheless, when she doesn't get her way, my sister can be incredibly harmful to herself. It wasn't the only time she threatened herself at the boarding school with a knife. She has used similar threats to control my parents ever since she was admitted to the ward. For instance, she threatened to hurt herself if they didn't take her out for fast food after my 19th birthday. She frequently hits her head against the wall as a strategy. My mother didn't want to report this to the ward, but my father did. My sister has also made up claims of being harmed by doctors, but they never add together. Another element in her situation may be pathological lying, which is probably a major reason she is in a long-term facility. The cycle would repeat if my parents gave in to her demands once more if she were at home. I believe Little Miss Sunshine is relying on it. Third update. My knowledge of Little Miss Sunshine has increased. First of all, I acknowledge that I erred in some of my previous writings, including misrepresenting her age and other specifics. Anyone in my family who reads this would recognize me, even though I'm terrible at arithmetic and frequently try to hide facts to remain anonymous. To be clear, my sister blew out my birthday candles for the first time when she was 3 years old, and I was 8 when she was born. I was bitter as my parents began honoring her on my birthdays from the very beginning. By the time I turned 11, everything revolved around her, presents bearing her name, places she enjoyed, and her assisting me in unwrapping my gifts. Even if my parents acknowledged their mistakes, the years they stole from me still remain. Concerning the diagnosis of my sister, although a person cannot be officially diagnosed with narcissism until they are 18, my father acknowledged that she exhibits symptoms of potential NPD and other disorders. Due to the experiences she experienced as a youngster, my mother was also diagnosed with PTSD and another mental illness. Since my sister is their problem, not mine, my father advised me to overlook the fact that my parents have kept many details ambiguous. One of the most sensible things he has ever said to me is that the present condition of Little Miss Sunshine. She has no definite release date and is still in the ward. Although some of her anger has been tamed by therapy, she still feels entitled to all I own. She even demanded her own apartment during outbursts regarding mine. She has also continued to think that my birthday is hers. She was brought up that way, and my parents are solely to blame. They have requested me to keep quiet about the matter, stating that there is no assurance she will recover and that years of therapy will be necessary. In addition to taking medicine and attending treatment, my mother has become lethargic. She was temporarily committed for beating my father, but for some reason, she kept her job. Her employer let her to work from home for a lower salary. My viewpoint, since my actual birth date is eternally marred, I have made the decision to celebrate my birthday on the day of my belated celebration going forward. Returning to Reddit has caused me stress, even though I thought I was doing okay. My supervisor sent me home for the day because I'm so irritable and cynical. To deal with this, I'm thinking of looking for free counseling or local support groups. I am grateful to everyone who has read and comprehends my suffering. Although you have shown me kindness, I must concentrate on moving past my past. I may never come back here or respond to comments. Last edit, I discovered that I had committed math mistakes once more after reading my post again. My supervisor told me to take a sick day because I've been such a mess. Stress even made me throw up. Another post I came across showed parents chopping up their older child's personalized birthday cake for their golden child. This and other posts like it made me realize how many parents are just like me, changing only after embarrassment but remaining the same on a deep level. I'm cutting off communication with my parents and will talk to my grandparents about it more. I might not make another post here. I'd like to thank everyone who helped me.